The Spirit's Book by Allan Kardec. Part 3. Moral Laws. Chapter 1. Divine or Natural Law. The characteristics of natural law.
What is meant by natural law?
Natural law is the law of God. It is the only law that is truly necessary for human beings to be happy. It shows them what they should or should not do, and they only suffer misfortune when they depart from it.
Can God prescribe to humankind in one age what would be prohibited in another?
God does not err, for humans are the ones who must modify their laws because they are imperfect, but God's laws are perfect. The harmony regulating both the material and moral universe is founded upon laws that God has established forever.
What do the divine laws encompass? Do they apply to anything other than moral conduct?
All the laws of nature are divine because God is the author of all things. Scientists study the laws of matter, whereas moral individuals study and practice the laws of the soul.
Do humans have the ability to master both the laws of nature and the laws of matter?
Yes, but a single existence is not enough to do so.
Are the divine laws the same for all worlds?
Reason tells us they must be appropriate for the nature of each world and proportioned to the degree of advancement of the beings that inhabit them.
The origin and knowledge of natural law.
Has God provided all humans the means of knowing God's law?
All may know about it, but not all understand it. Moral persons and those who desire to examine it are the ones who understand it best. Nevertheless, all will understand it someday because progress must be made.
Before its union with the body, does the soul comprehend God's law more clearly than after incarnating?
It comprehends God's law according to the degree of its perfection, and it preserves an intuitive memory of it after uniting with the body. However, base human instincts often cause it to forget it.
Where is God's law written?
In the conscience.
If humans carry God's law in their conscience, why does it have to be revealed to them?
They have forgotten and disregarded it. God has willed for them to be reminded.
Has God endowed certain individuals with the mission of revealing the divine law?
Yes, certainly. In every age, individuals have received this mission. They are high-order spirits who have incarnated with the purpose of enabling humankind to progress.
Haven't those who were supposed to instruct humankind in God's law sometimes erred? And haven't they often led others astray through erroneous principles?
People may have been led astray by those who were not actually inspired by God, and who, out of ambition, regarded themselves as having a mission that they did not, in fact, have. Nevertheless, they were geniuses, and great truths could often be found even in the midst of their errors.
What are the characteristics of true prophets?
True prophets are moral individuals inspired by God, and whom we may recognize by their words and deeds. God does not employ a liar to teach the truth.
What is the perfect standard that God has offered to humankind as a guide and model?
Look at Jesus.
Have the divine or natural laws been revealed to humankind only by Jesus? Before him, were they only known by intuition?
Haven't we stated that they are written everywhere? From the remotest times, all who have meditated on wisdom have been able to understand and teach these laws. Though their teachings were incomplete, they prepared the ground to receive the seed. Since the divine laws are written in the book of nature, men and women are able to understand them as soon as they want to look into them. That is why the precepts of the divine laws have been proclaimed by moral persons in all ages, and also why we have encountered their elements, though incomplete or altered by ignorance and superstition, in the moral doctrines of all cultures that have left barbarism.
Since Jesus has already taught the true laws of God, of what value are the teachings given by the spirits? Do they really have anything more to teach us?
Jesus' teachings were frequently allegorical and in the form of parables because he spoke according to his time and place, but today the truth must be made intelligible for all. Thus, it is necessary to explain God's laws more fully and elaborate on them because there are so few who understand them and still fewer who actually practice them. Our mission is to awaken eyes and ears in order to confound the proud and unmask the hypocrites who display virtue and religion outwardly in order to hide their inner turpitudes. The teaching of the spirits must be clear and without error, so that no one can feign ignorance, and so that all may judge it and evaluate it with their own reason. We are in charge of preparing the kingdom of God announced by Jesus, and that is why no one should be able to interpret the law of God according to his or her own passions or to distort the meaning of a law that is entirely love and charity.
Why hasn't the truth always been within everyone's reach?
Each thing must come in its own time. Truth is like light. We must accustom ourselves to it little by little, otherwise it dazzles us. There has never been a time in which God allowed humankind to receive communications as complete and instructive as the ones being given today. As you know, in ancient times there were only a few individuals who were in possession of what they regarded as a sacred science, and which they kept as a mystery from other individuals whom they considered as being profane. You must understand from what you know of the laws governing spirit phenomena that those individuals received but a few, scattered truths amongst an ambiguous and mostly symbolic collection. Nevertheless, enlightened individuals nowadays should not discount any ancient philosophical system, tradition, or religion because they all contain the seeds of great truths. Although they seem to contradict one another and are scattered among unfounded embellishments, today they are much easier to comprehend thanks to the key that Spiritism has provided. It is a key to an infinite number of things that until now seemed unreasonable, but whose reality has recently been irrefutably demonstrated. Therefore, do not fail to make those materials subjects of your study. They are very rich in teachings and may contribute a great deal to your education.
Good and evil.
What definition may be given to morality?
Morality is the rule of good conduct. In other words, it is the ability to distinguish between good and evil. It is founded on the observance of God's law. Humans behave correctly when they do everything for the good of all, for then they obey God's law.
How can we distinguish between good and evil?
Good is everything that is in harmony with God's law, whereas evil is everything that deviates from it. Thus, doing what is good conforms to God's law, while doing evil infringes on it.
Do humans have the means within them to distinguish between good and evil?
Yes, when they believe in God and desire to know the difference. God has given them intelligence to discern one from the other.
Since humans are prone to error, couldn't they be mistaken in discerning good from evil and believe that they are doing what is good, when in reality they are doing what is evil?
Jesus said, "Do unto others what you would want them do unto you." That sums up everything. You will never go wrong.
The rule of good and evil, which may be called the rule of reciprocity or solidarity, does not apply to individuals' own conduct regarding themselves. Can they find a rule and a safe guide for such conduct in natural law?
When you eat too much, it harms you. Well, then that is God letting you know how much you really need, and when you exceed it, you are punished. The same applies to everything else. Natural law outlines for all humans the limit of their needs, and when they exceed that limit, they are punished by suffering. If they would always listen to that voice that says enough, they would avoid most of the ills they accuse nature of.
Why may evil be found in the very nature of things? I'm speaking of moral evil. Couldn't God have created humankind under better moral conditions?
We have already told you. Spirits are created simple and ignorant. See number 115. God leaves men and women to choose their own path, and it is worse for them if they take the evil one. Their pilgrimage will be all the longer. If there were no mountains, humans would not understand that they can ascend and descend. If there were no rocks, they would not understand that there are hard objects. The spirit must acquire experience, and to do so it must know good and evil. That is why there is a union of spirit and body.
The different social positions create needs that are not the same for everyone. Is natural law therefore not a uniform rule for everyone?
Such different positions exist in nature itself and are in accord with the law of progress, but this fact does not invalidate the unity of natural law, which applies to everything.
Are good and evil absolute for everybody?
God's law is the same for everybody. but evil especially depends on the willingness one has for doing it. Good is always good, and evil is always evil, whatever a person's position may be. The difference is in the degree of responsibility.
Are cannibals who yield to their instinct guilty when they eat human flesh?
I have said that evil depends on the will. Well then, persons are guiltier the more they know what they should do.
It seems that evil sometimes results from necessity, such as, for example, the necessity in certain cases for destruction, even that of our fellow beings. In such cases, has there been a transgression of God's law?
Evil is no less evil by being necessary, but this necessity disappears as the soul purifies itself in passing from one existence to another. Then people become guiltier when they commit evil because they have a better understanding of it.
The evil we commit frequently results from the position in which others have placed us. In such a case, who is more culpable?
The responsibility for evil falls upon the one who has caused it. Thus, those who are led into evil by the position in which others have placed them are less culpable than those who have made them commit it. All will suffer the penalty not only for the evil they have done, but for the evil they have caused.
Are those who do not do evil themselves, but who take advantage of the evil committed by others culpable to the same degree?
It is as if they themselves had committed it. Upon taking advantage of it, they participate in it. Perhaps they would have recoiled before the deed itself, but once it was done, and they then took advantage of it, it was because they approved of it and would have committed it themselves if they could have, or if they had been more daring.
Is the desire for evil as reprehensible as evil itself?
That depends. There is virtue in willingly resisting the desire for evil if one desires to commit it, especially when there is a possibility of satisfying the desire. However, if it is only because the opportunity did not present itself, the person is culpable.
In order to be pleasing to God and to ensure our future situation, is it enough simply not to do what is evil?
No. All must do good to the best of their abilities, for all will answer for all the evil that has resulted from the good they left undone.
Are there persons who have no possibility of doing good because of their position?
There are none who cannot do good. Only selfish persons never find an opportunity for doing so. It is enough to come in contact with others in order to do good, and everyday life offers such a possibility to whomever is not blinded by selfishness. Doing good does not only mean being charitable, but also being as useful as possible whenever your help is needed.
Aren't the surroundings in which certain people live the main reason for many to involve themselves in vice and crime?
Yes, but even then it is the result of a trial chosen by their spirit in the state of freedom. It wanted to expose itself to temptation in order to have the merit of resisting it.
When individuals are immersed in an atmosphere of vice, doesn't evil become an almost irresistible draw?
Draw, yes. Irresistible, no. Because in the midst of such an atmosphere of vice, you can nonetheless find great virtue. There are spirits who have the strength to resist, and who have at the same time the mission of exerting a good influence on their fellow beings.
Does the merit of the good that one does depend on certain conditions? That is, are there different degrees of merit in doing good?
The merit lies in its difficulty. There is no merit in doing good if there is no self-denial and if it costs nothing. God takes more notice of poor individuals who share their only piece of bread than of the rich who give only what is superfluous to them. Jesus told you this in the parable of the widow's mite.
The dividing of natural law.
Is the entire law of God contained in Jesus' maxim of loving one's neighbor?
This maxim certainly reaffirms all humankind's duties toward each other, but it is necessary to show them its application, because otherwise they will neglect such duties as they in fact do nowadays. Moreover, natural law covers all life's circumstances, and this particular maxim refers to only one of its aspects. People need precise rules. General and overly vague precepts leave too many doors open to interpretation.
What do you think of the dividing of natural law into 10 parts, covering the laws of worship, labor, reproduction, preservation, destruction, society, progress, equality, liberty, and lastly, the law of justice, love, and charity?
The dividing of God's law into 10 parts comes from Moses and covers all the circumstances of life, that which is essential. You may follow that division, although, like other classification systems, it does not contain anything absolute. Such systems always depend on the point of view from which a subject is considered. The last law is the most important, since through it, humans can advance the furthest in the spiritual life. It sums up all the others.
Chapter 2. The Law of Worship. The purpose of worship.
What does worship entail?
Worship is the lifting up of the thought towards God. Through worship, the soul draws nearer to its Creator.
Is worship the result of an innate sentiment, or is it the product of education?
An innate sentiment, like that of the divinity. The awareness of their weakness leads humans to bow before the one who can protect them.
Have there ever been peoples devoid of all sentiment of worship?
No, because there have never been atheistic peoples. All have understood that there is a supreme being above them.
Does worship have its source in natural law?
It is part of natural law because it is the result of an innate sentiment in humankind. That is why we find it among all peoples, albeit expressed in different forms.
Outward worship forms.
Does worship require outward expression?
True worship comes from the heart. In all your actions, always remember that the Lord is watching you.
Does God have any preference for those who worship in this or that manner?
God prefers those who sincerely worship from the bottom of their heart, doing good and avoiding evil, to those who think they honor God through ceremonies that do not render them any better than their neighbor. All are brothers and sisters, children of the same God, and God calls all those who follow the divinely established laws, whatever may be the form in which they express themselves. Those who only put on an appearance of piety are hypocrites. Those for whom worship is only a pretense that is contradicted by their actual conduct set a bad example. Those who profess to worship Christ, but who are proud, envious, and jealous, who are hard and unforgiving toward others, or who are ambitious for worldly things, I declare to you that their religion is on their lips only and not in their heart. God, who sees everything, will say, "Those who know the truth are 100 times guiltier of the evil they do than the unknowing nomad in the desert, and they will be treated accordingly on Judgment Day." If a blind person passing by you accidentally knocks you down, you forget about it, but if it is a person whose sight is perfect, you rightly take offense. So do not ask if there is one particular form of worship that is the most acceptable, since that would be like asking whether it is more pleasing to God to be worshipped in one language rather than in another. I will say to you once more, hymns do not reach God except through the door of the heart.
Is it wrong to practice a religion that is not believed in from the bottom of the heart if it is done out of human respect and in order not to offend those who think differently?
As in so many other things, the intent is the rule. Those whose sole aim is to show respect for the beliefs of others do no wrong. In fact, they do better than those who would ridicule such beliefs, since that would show a lack of charity. However, those who practice a religion out of ulterior motives or ambition are contemptible in the sight of God and humankind. God could not be pleased with those who only put on a show of humility in order to gain the approval of others.
Is group worship preferable to individual worship?
Those who assemble for communion of thought and sentiment have more power to attract good spirits, and the same applies when they gather to worship God. But do not think that individual worship is therefore less effective, for each individual can worship God with divine thoughts.
The contemplative life.
Do those who dedicate themselves to the contemplative life, doing nothing wrongful and thinking only of God, have any merit in the divine sight?
No. Even though they do nothing wrongful, neither do they do any good, and they are useless. Moreover, not doing good is in itself wrongful. God wants men and women to think about God, but does not want them to do only that, for God has given them duties to fulfill. Those who spend all their time in meditation and contemplation do nothing meritorious before God, since their life is entirely personal and of no use to humankind. God will ask them to account for the good they did not do.
Prayer.
Is prayer pleasing to God?
A prayer is always pleasing to God when spoken from the heart, for intent is everything to God. A prayer from the heart is preferable to one you read, no matter how beautiful it may be, if you read more with the lips than with the thought. Prayer is pleasing to God when it is offered with faith, fervor, and sincerity. Do not believe, however, that God is touched by the prayer of vain, proud, or selfish people, unless their prayer is an act of sincere repentance and true humility.
What is the general character of prayer?
Prayer is an act of worship. Praying to God is thinking of God, drawing nearer to God, putting one's self in communication with God. Through prayer, we may do three things: praise, ask, and thank.
Why is it that certain persons who pray a great deal have nevertheless a very bad temper, are jealous, envious, cantankerous, lack benevolence and forbearance, and are even depraved?
What is essential is not to pray a great deal, but to pray rightly. Such persons think that all the merit lies in the length of the prayer, and they shut their eyes to their own defects. For them, prayer is an occupation, a use of time, but it is not self-examination. It is not the remedy per se that is ineffectual, but the manner in which it is applied.
May one pray effectively for others?
The spirit of the one who prays acts out of a will to do good. Through prayer, it attracts good spirits who cooperate in the good it desires to do.
Can the prayers we offer for ourselves modify the nature of our trials and change their course?
Your trials are in God's hands, and there are those that must be endured to the very end. However, God always takes resignation into account. Prayer attracts good spirits who give you strength to courageously endure your trials. Thus, they seem less difficult to you. As we have already stated, prayer is never useless when offered rightly because it provides strength, which in itself is a good result. Heaven helps those who help themselves, you know this. Besides, God could not change the workings of nature to suit the taste of each and every individual, since what may be a great evil from your narrow point of view and for your ephemeral life is often a great good within the general order of the universe. Furthermore, how many misfortunes are authored by people themselves through their own improvidence or wrongdoing? They are punished for their specific sins. Nevertheless, your just requests are heard more often than you might suppose. You think that God has not heard your prayer because there has been no miracle on your behalf, while you have in fact received divine assistance through means so natural that it seems to have happened by chance or by necessity. Most often, God suggests the thought needed for you to get yourselves out of your predicament.
Is it any use praying for the dead and for suffering spirits? And if so, how can our prayers provide them consolation and shorten their sufferings? Do our prayers have the power to appease the justice of God?
Prayer has no effect in changing God's designs, but the soul for whom you pray experiences relief because it witnesses the interest you show in it, and because an unhappy soul is always consoled when it encounters other charitable souls who share in its suffering. Moreover, through prayer you may incite it to repentance and the desire to do what is needed to become happy. It is in this sense that you can shorten its affliction if, on its part, it contributes with its own goodwill. Aroused by prayer, such a desire to improve attracts to the suffering spirit other spirits who come to enlighten, console, and give it hope. Jesus prayed for the straying sheep. In doing so, he showed you that you are culpable if you do not pray for those who are the most in need.
What is to be thought of the opinion that rejects praying for the dead because it is not prescribed in the Gospels?
Christ said to all humankind, "Love one another." This recommendation implies using all possible means to demonstrate love toward others, but without going into any details regarding the way to reach this goal. If it is true that nothing can turn God aside from applying divine justice to every one of a spirit's actions, it is no less true that the prayer you direct to God on behalf of those who inspire your love is for them a testimony of remembrance that consoles them and contributes toward relieving their sufferings. They can be helped when and only when they show the slightest repentance, but it will nevertheless cause them never to forget that a sympathetic soul has been concerned about them. It will instill in them the sweet belief that your intercession has been useful. This necessarily results on their part in a sentiment of love for the one who has shown this proof of friendship and piety. Consequently, the love recommended to humankind by Christ has increased between them, and both have obeyed the law of love and union of all beings, the divine law that must lead to unity, the Spirit's objective and purpose.
Polytheism.
If it is erroneous, why is polytheism one of the most ancient and widespread beliefs?
The idea of a single God could only appear among humans as the result of the development of their ideas. Incapable in their ignorance of conceiving of an immaterial being without a determined form and who acted upon matter, they endowed God with the attributes of the corporeal nature, that is, a form and a figure. From then on, everything that seemed to surpass the proportions of ordinary intelligence became a deity to them. Whatever they could not understand had to be the work of a supernatural power, and it was no more than a small step from that to believing in as many distinct powers as there were effects. Nonetheless, in all ages there have been enlightened individuals who have understood the impossibility of such a multitude of powers for governing the world without some higher direction over them all, and who, consequently, lifted up their thought to a single God.
Since spirit phenomena have been produced throughout time and have been known about since the world began, couldn't they have contributed to the belief in the plurality of gods?
Of course, because humans labeled as God everything that was superhuman. Thus, the spirits were gods to them. Also, that is why, whenever individuals distinguished themselves among others by their actions, their genius, or a secret power that the common folk could not comprehend, they were made into a god and worshipped after death.
Sacrifice.
The practice of human sacrifice dates back to remotest antiquity. Why was humankind led to believe that such a thing could be pleasing to God?
First, because they did not understand God as being the source of the good. Amongst primitive peoples, matter predominated over spirit. They yielded to their animal instincts, and that is why they were generally so cruel their moral sense had not yet developed. Second, primitive humans naturally believed that a living creature had much more value in God's sight than an inert object. This is what led them at first to immolate animals and later humans because, according to their erroneous belief, they thought the value of a sacrifice was in proportion to the importance of the victim. Usually, whenever you buy a gift for someone, you always select one with as great a value as the friendship and consideration you want to show the person. The same applied to ignorant humans with respect to God.
Then the sacrificing of animals preceded that of human beings?
There can be no doubt about it.
According to that explanation, didn't human sacrifices originate from a sentiment of cruelty?
No, but from a mistaken concept of what was pleasing to God. Look at Abraham. In time, humans began to commit the abuse of immolating their national enemies and even their personal enemies. However, God has never demanded sacrifices, animal or human. God could never be honored by the useless destruction of God's own creatures.
Could human sacrifices ever have been pleasing to God if performed with pious intentions?
No, never, but God does judge the intention. Since they were ignorant, those ancients may have believed they were performing a praiseworthy deed in immolating one of their fellow beings. In that case, God would have heeded the thought, but not the deed. As they evolved, human beings had to recognize their error and reject such sacrifices, which could no longer be acceptable to enlightened spirits. I say enlightened because, back then, spirits were shrouded by the veil of matter. By their free will, however, they were able to perceive their origin and their final purpose, and many already intuitively understood the evil they were committing, although in order to continue gratifying their passions, they did not cease practicing it.
What should we think of so-called holy wars? Wouldn't the sentiment that leads fanatical peoples to think they are pleasing God by exterminating the greatest possible number of those who do not share their beliefs have the same origin as the sentiment that formerly led them to sacrifice their fellow beings?
Such peoples are driven by bad spirits. By waging war on their fellow beings, they act against the will of God, who requires that people love their neighbors as themselves. All religions, or rather all peoples, worship the same God, whether by this or that name. Why wage a war of extermination because a religion is different, or has not yet attained the religious progress typical of enlightened cultures? Peoples may be excused for not believing in the word of the one who was animated by the Spirit of God and sent by God, especially those who have neither seen him nor witnessed his divine acts. But how could you possibly expect them to believe in that word of peace when you seek them out while bearing a sword? They must be educated, and we must seek to enable them to understand his doctrine by persuasion and kindness rather than by force and blood. Most of you do not believe in our communications with certain mortals, so how could you expect strangers to believe in your words when your acts belie the doctrine you profess?
Did the offering of the fruits of the earth have more merit in God's sight than the sacrificing of animals?
I have already answered that by saying that God judges the intention. The deed itself holds little importance. Offering the fruits of the earth rather than the blood of victims would obviously be more agreeable to God. As we have told you and continue to repeat, a prayer said from the bottom of the heart is 100 times more pleasing to God than all the physical offerings you could make. To second, I repeat, the intention here is everything. The deed, nothing.
Mightn't there have been a way of rendering those offerings more pleasing to God by consecrating them to the relief of those?
God always blesses those who practice the good. Helping the poor and afflicted is the best means of honoring God. I do not mean to say that God disapproves of the ceremonies you use for prayer. However, there is a great deal of money spent on such ceremonies that could be employed more usefully. God loves simplicity in all things. The person who attaches importance to external acts and not those of the heart is a narrow-minded spirit. Judge for yourself as to whether or not God should be more concerned with form than with depth.
Chapter 3. The Law of Labor. The necessity of labor.
Is the necessity of labor a law of nature?
Labor is a law of nature, and as such is a necessity per se. Because civilization both increases people's needs and their enjoyments, it obliges them to work more.
Should we understand labor to entail only material occupations?
No, the spirit labors as much as the body. Every useful occupation is labor.
Why has labor been imposed on humankind?
It is a consequence of their corporeal nature. It is a means of expiation and at the same time a means of perfecting their intelligence. Without labor, humans would remain in intellectual infancy. Thus, they must owe their food, safety, and well-being to their own labor and activity. God has granted more intelligence to certain persons in order to compensate for their physical weakness, but labor is involved nonetheless.
Why does nature itself provide for all the needs of the animals?
Everything in nature labors. Animals labor as you do, but their work, like their intelligence, is limited to their self-preservation. That is why labor does not lead to progress among them, while among human beings it has a double objective: the preservation of the body and the development of thought. The latter is also a necessity and raises them above themselves. When I say that the labor of animals is limited to self-preservation, I mean the objective toward which their labor is aimed. But while devoted entirely to providing for their physical needs, they are also unknowingly agents collaborating in the designs of the Creator. Their labor plays no less of a part in the final objective of nature, although you often do not see its immediate result.
On more highly evolved worlds, are humans subjected to the same necessity of labor?
The nature of the labor is relative to that of the needs. The less material the needs, the less material the labor. Yet you must not assume that humans on such worlds remain inactive and useless. Idleness would be a torture instead of a benefit.
Are those who possess plenty of assets to ensure their welfare exempted from the law of labor?
From paid labor, perhaps, but not from the obligation to render themselves useful according to their means and to perfect their own or others' intelligence. This, too, is labor. If those to whom God has granted enough assets to ensure their welfare are not obligated to eat their bread from the sweat of their brow, their obligation to be useful
Aren't there those who are incapable of working at anything at all and whose existence serves no purpose?
God is just and only condemns those who intentionally live a life that serves no purpose because they live by depending on other people's work. God desires for all to make themselves useful according to their own faculties.
Does the law of nature impose upon children the obligation to work for their parents?
Certainly, just as parents must work for their children. That is why God has made filial love and parental love natural sentiments, so that by such mutual love, the members of the same family may be led to help each other. This is frequently not recognized in your present society.
The limit of labor. Rest.
Since rest is needed after labor, isn't rest therefore a law of nature?
Absolutely. It rest serves to restore the strength of the body. It is also needed to give a little more freedom to the intelligence to raise itself above matter.
What is to be thought of those who abuse their authority by imposing too much work on their subordinates?
It is one of the worst things they could do. All who have the power of command are responsible for any excessive work they impose on their subordinates, since if they do so, they transgress the law of God.
Do humans have the right to retire in old age?
Yes, none are required to labor beyond their ability to do so.
But what resources do aging people have available if they must earn a living but cannot?
The strong should work for the weak. In the absence of a family, society should replace it. That is the law of charity.
Chapter 4. The law of reproduction. The global population.
Is the reproduction of living beings a law of nature?
Obviously, without reproduction, the corporeal world would die out.
If the population continues to follow the constant progression that we now see, will a time come in which it is too excessive for the earth?
No. God has foreseen this and always keeps everything in balance. God does nothing useless. Since they only see one angle of the picture of nature, humans are unable to perceive the harmony of the whole.
The succession and perfecting of the races.
At this moment, there are certain human races that are obviously diminishing. Will a time come when they will have completely disappeared from the earth?
Yes, but others will have taken their place, as others will someday take yours.
Are the human beings of today a new creation, or are they the perfected descendants of primitive beings?
They are the same spirits. They have returned to perfect themselves in new bodies, but they are still far from perfection. Thus, the present human race, which, through its growth, tends to invade the whole earth and to replace the races that are dying out, will also go through its own period of decrease and extinction. Other more perfected races will replace it. These will have descended from the present ones, just as the civilized human beings of the present day have descended from the brutes and primitives of early eras.
From a purely physical point of view, are the bodies of the present race a special creation, or have they evolved from more primitive bodies by way of reproduction?
The origin of the human race is lost in the night of time, but since all belong to one great human family, whatever the primitive roots of each race were, they have since been able to mix with one another and produce new types.
From a physical standpoint, what is the distinctive and dominant characteristic of primitive races?
The development of brute strength at the expense of intellectual prowess. The opposite is occurring nowadays. Humans act more through their intelligence than through physical strength, and yet they accomplish 100 times more because they have placed the forces of nature at their service, which the animals cannot do.
Is the improvement of animal and vegetable species through science contrary to natural law? Wouldn't it be more in?
Everything must be done to arrive at perfection. Humans themselves are an instrument that God uses as a means for accomplishing the divine ends. Since perfection is the goal toward which nature tends, to favor such perfection is to correspond to those ends.
But in their efforts to improve various species, humans are generally motivated by a personal sentiment that has no other goal than to increase their own enjoyments. Doesn't this diminish their merit?
What does it matter that their merits are void provided progress is made? It is up to them to render their labor praiseworthy through their intention. Besides, by means of such labor they exercise and develop their intelligence, and it is from this aspect that they derive the greatest benefit.
Obstacles to reproduction.
Are the human laws and customs that have as their objective or as their result the creation of obstacles to reproduction contrary to the law of nature?
Everything that hinders the operations of nature is contrary to the overall law.
Nevertheless, there are species of living beings, both animals and plants, whose unrestrained reproduction would be harmful to other species, and of which humans themselves would soon be victims. Would it be wrong to hinder their reproduction?
God has given to humans, above all other living beings, a power that they should use for good and not for abuse. They may regulate reproduction according to their needs, but they should not hinder it unnecessarily. The intelligent action of humankind is a counterbalance set by God among the forces of nature to re-establish their equilibrium. This is what further distinguishes humans from the animals, because humans do so with full awareness. In their turn, the animals take part in this equilibrium. While the instinct of destruction has been given to the animals as a means for their own self-preservation, it also causes them to hinder the excessive and perhaps dangerous overpopulation of the animal and vegetable species that nourish them.
What should be thought about means that are meant to prevent reproduction with a view to satisfying sensuality?
It proves the predominance of the body over the soul and demonstrates how deeply humans are immersed in matter.
Marriage and celibacy.
Is marriage the permanent union of two individuals contrary to the law of nature?
It represents progress in the evolution of humankind.
What effect would abolishing marriage have on human society?
A return to the life of the animals.
Does the absolute indissolubility of marriage belong to the law of nature, or is it only a human law?
It is a human law that is quite contrary to the law of nature. But humans may modify their laws. Only those of nature are immutable.
Is voluntary celibacy a state of perfection that is meritorious in God's sight?
No, and those who live that way out of selfishness displease God and mislead others.
Isn't celibacy a sacrifice for certain individuals who desire to devote themselves entirely to serving humankind?
That is very different. I said out of selfishness. Every personal sacrifice is meritorious when it is made for the good. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the merit.
Polygamy.
Is the approximate numerical equality between the sexes in?
Yes, for everything in nature has a final purpose.
Which of the two, polygamy or monogamy, is more in harmony with the law of nature?
Polygamy is a human law, and abolishing it is a mark of social progress. In God's view, marriage should be based on the love of the individuals who join hands. In polygamy, there is no true love. There is nothing more than sensuality.
Chapter 5. The Law of Preservation. The self-preservation instinct.
Is the self-preservation instinct a law of nature?
Absolutely. All living beings possess it regardless of their degree of intelligence. In some, it is purely mechanical. In others, it is thought out.
What was God's purpose in granting the instinct of self-preservation to all living beings?
All beings must collaborate in the designs of providence. That is why God has given them the need to stay alive. Besides, life is necessary for beings to perfect themselves. They sense this instinctively without perceiving it.
The means of self-preservation.
Since God has given human beings the need to stay alive, does God always provide them with the means of doing so?
Yes, and if they do not find them, it is because they do not understand them. God could not have given humans the need to stay alive without also having given them the means. Hence, the Creator has caused the earth to produce in such a way as to provide for the needs of all its inhabitants, for only that which is necessary is useful. The superfluous never is.
Why doesn't the earth always produce enough to provide for humans' needs?
Since they are ungrateful, they neglect her. Nevertheless, she is an excellent mother. Frequently, they blame nature for the consequences of their own incompetence or lack of foresight. The earth would always produce what is needed if humans knew how to be content. If she does not supply all their needs, it is because they use her to provide themselves with superfluities instead of necessities. Look at the nomads in the desert. They always find enough to live on because they do not create imaginary needs. But when half of all that is produced is wasted on satisfying fanciful desires, should people wonder at finding nothing the next day and have a reason to pity themselves at being deprived in times of scarcity? In truth, I tell you that nature does not lack foresight. Rather, people do not know how to control themselves.
Should we understand only the products of the soil as being the fruits of the earth?
The soil is the original source from which all other resources derive, because, in the last analysis, such resources are only a transformation of the products of the soil. For that reason, we should understand the fruits of the earth to be everything that humans can enjoy in this world.
The means of subsistence are frequently lacking for certain individuals, even in the midst of the abundance around them. To what is this fact due?
It is primarily due to the selfishness of humans who do not always do what they should. Next, and most often, it is due to humans themselves. Seek and you shall find. These words do not mean that it is enough to simply look to the earth in order to find what you desire. Instead, you must seek with ardor and perseverance, without feebleness, and without allowing yourselves to be discouraged by obstacles that are quite often no more than means of putting your tenacity, patience, and firmness to the test.
Aren't there situations in which the means of subsistence do not depend solely on human will and where the lack of the barest necessities is a consequence of circumstances?
These situations are frequently cruel trials which humans must undergo and to which they know they will be exposed. Their merit is in their submission to God's will if their intelligence does not furnish them with some means for escaping their difficulty. If death must touch them, they should submit to it without complaint, reasoning that their hour of true freedom has arrived and that despair at the final moment may cause them to lose the fruit of their resignation.
Have those who in critical situations were obligated to sacrifice their fellow beings to appease their hunger committed a crime? If it was a crime, was it lessened by the need to stay alive, which the preservation instinct has given them?
I have already responded in saying that there is more merit in undergoing all the trials of life with selflessness and courage. In this case, there is a homicide and crime against nature, and it must be doubly punished.
On worlds where their physical makeup is pure, do the living beings have need of nourishment?
Yes, but their food is in keeping with their nature. Such food would not be substantial enough for your dense digestive systems. Likewise, they would not be able to digest yours.
The enjoyment of material things.
Is the use of the fruits of the earth a right of all humans?
That right is a consequence of the need to stay alive. God would not impose a duty without granting the means to fulfill it.
Towards what end has God made the enjoyment of material things attractive?
To drive humans to fulfill their missions and also to test them with temptation.
What is the purpose of such temptation?
To develop their reason so that they may learn to keep themselves from excesses.
What should be thought of those who seek to satisfy their tastes through all kinds of excesses?
They are unfortunate creatures whom we should pity and not envy because they are very close to death.
Is it physical or moral death that they are close to?
Both.
Necessary and superfluous things.
How can people know the limit of what is necessary?
Those who are sensible know it by intuition, but many recognize it at the cost of their own experience.
Hasn't nature traced out the limit of what is necessary in our own physical organization?
Yes, but people are insatiable. Nature has traced out the limits of their needs in their physical organization, but their vices alter their constitution and create artificial needs.
What should be thought of those who monopolize the fruits of the earth to procure for themselves what is superfluous at the expense of others who lack what is necessary?
They do not understand God's law, and will have to answer for the privations they have caused.
Voluntary privations. Mortifications.
Does the law of self-preservation oblige us to provide for our own physical needs?
Yes, because without energy and health, labor is impossible.
Are we culpable for seeking our own well-being?
Well-being is a natural desire. God only prohibits abuse because it is contrary to self-preservation. God does not consider it a crime for you to seek your own well-being if it is not gained at another's expense, and if it does not weaken either your moral or physical strength.
Do voluntary privations, which have as their aim an equally voluntary expiation, have any merit in God's sight?
Do good to others, and you will have greater merit.
A life of mortifications through asceticism has been practiced since ancient times and among different cultures. Is it meritorious from any point of view?
Ask for whom it is useful, and you will have your answer. If it only serves the one who practices it, and if it hinders him or her from doing good to others, it is selfish, whatever may be the pretext under which it is disguised. Submitting oneself to privation and working on behalf of others is true mortification according to Christian charity.
Is the abstention from certain foods, prescribed among various cultures, based on reason?
Everything that humans can eat without harming their health is permitted. Lawmakers, however, have prohibited certain foods with a useful end in mind, and in order to give greater weight to their laws, they have represented them as having come from God.
Is humankind's use of animals as food contrary to the law of nature?
With your present physical constitution, flesh nourishes flesh. Otherwise, humans would perish. The law of self-preservation imposes on you the duty to preserve your energies and health so that you may fulfill the law of labor. You should therefore eat according to your physical requirements.
Is the abstention from foods animal or otherwise meritorious as an expiation?
Yes, if you deprive yourselves for the sake of others, but God cannot see mortification when there is no serious and useful privation. This is why we say that those who only seem to deprive themselves are hypocrites.
What are we to think of the mutilations practiced on the body of humans or animals?
What is the point of such a question? Again, ask yourself whether a thing is useful. What is useless cannot be pleasing to God, and what is harmful is always displeasing. You can be very sure that God is sensitive only to sentiments that raise the soul toward God. It is by practicing the divine laws instead of violating them that you can shake off the burden of your terrestrial matter.
If the sufferings of this world enable us to evolve depending on the manner in which we bear them, may we also evolve through sufferings that we create intentionally?
Natural sufferings are the only ones that enable you to evolve, because they come from God. Intentional sufferings serve no purpose when they have no value for the good of others. Do you believe that those who shorten their lives through superhuman hardships, the bonzes, fakirs, and a few fanatics of various sects progress on their path? Why don't they labor for the good of their neighbors instead? Let them clothe the indigent, comfort those who mourn, work for those who are infirm, and endure privations to help the unfortunate. Then their life will be useful and pleasing to God. When you only have yourselves in mind in the intentional hardships to which you subject yourselves, it is selfishness. When you suffer for others, it is the practice of charity. Such are the precepts of Christ.
Since we should not create intentional sufferings for ourselves that are of no use to others, should we nevertheless protect ourselves from those that we foresee or from those that threaten us?
The self-preservation instinct has been given to all beings against dangers and sufferings. Whip your spirit and not your body. Mortify your pride and stifle your selfishness, that serpent devouring your heart, and you will do more for your progress than through self-inflictions that no longer have a place in this day and age.
Chapter 6. The Law of Destruction. Necessary destruction and abusive destruction.
Is destruction a law of nature?
It is necessary for everything to be destroyed in order to be reborn and regenerated. What you call destruction is no more than transformation that is aimed at renewing and improving living beings.
Has the destruction instinct been given to living beings for providential purposes?
God's creatures are the instruments that God uses for attaining the divine ends. In order to feed themselves, living beings destroy each other with the dual purpose of maintaining the balance of reproduction, which might otherwise become excessive, and utilizing the remains of their external envelopes. But it is only the envelope that is destroyed. The envelope is only an accessory and not the essential part of the thinking being. The essential part is the indestructible intelligent principle, which is developed through the various metamorphoses that it undergoes.
If destruction is necessary for the regeneration of beings, why does nature surround them with the means of self-preservation and conservation?
To prevent their destruction before the proper time. Any destruction that occurs too soon retards the development of the intelligent principle. That is why God has given to each being the need to stay alive and reproduce.
Since death should lead us to a better life and deliver us from the ills of this world, and should therefore be desired instead of dreaded, why do humans have an instinctive horror of it and see it as a cause for apprehension?
We have already stated that humans should seek to prolong their life in order to accomplish their task. That is why God has given them the self-preservation instinct. It sustains them in all their trials. Without it, they would frequently give in to discouragement. The secret voice that tells them to avoid death also tells them they may yet do something more for their progress. Whenever danger threatens them, it is a warning to them that they must take advantage of the time God has granted them. But ingrates usually give thanks to their lucky star instead of their creator.
Why has nature placed the agents of destruction side by side with the means of self-preservation?
The remedy beside the illness. We already have told you, in order to maintain balance and to serve as a counterweight.
Is the need for destruction the same on all worlds?
It is in proportion to how material each particular world is. It disappears altogether in a purer physical and moral state, on worlds more evolved than yours. The conditions of existence are altogether different.
Will the need for destruction always exist for humankind on the earth?
The need for destruction diminishes among humans to the degree that their spirit overcomes matter. That is why you may observe that the horror of destruction follows upon intellectual and moral development.
In their present state, do humans have an unlimited right of destruction in regard to animals?
That right is limited to the need of providing for their food and safety. Abuse has never been a right.
What about destruction that exceeds the limits of need and safety? Hunting, for instance, when it has no other objective than the pleasure of destroying needlessly.
It is a predominance of the animal nature over the spiritual nature. All destruction that exceeds the limits of need is a violation of God's law. Animals only destroy to satisfy their needs, but humans, who have free will, destroy without need. They will be called to account for abusing the freedom granted to them, because in such cases they yield to base instincts.
Do those cultures that carry their scrupulousness to excess regarding the destruction of animals have any special merit?
Such excess is a sentiment that in itself is praiseworthy, but it becomes abusive and its merit is neutralized by other kinds of abuse. They act more out of superstitious fear than true humaneness.
Destructive calamities.
For what purpose does God inflict humankind with destructive calamities?
To force them to progress more quickly. Have we not stated that destruction is necessary for the moral regeneration of spirits, who accomplish a new degree of perfection during each new existence? You must see the end in order to appreciate the results. You only judge such things from your own personal point of view, and you regard such afflictions as calamities because of the injury they cause you. However, these hardships are often necessary in order to make things arrive at a better order more quickly, and to accomplish in a few years what would otherwise require many centuries.
Couldn't God employ other methods instead of destructive calamities for improving humankind?
Yes, and they are employed every day. Through the knowledge of good and evil, God has given to each of you the means of progressing. However, humans do not take advantage of them. Thus, it is necessary to afflict them in their pride and make them feel their own weakness.
But the moral person succumbs to these calamities along with the wicked. Is this just?
Throughout life, humans relate everything to their body, but after death, they think differently. As we have already stated, the life of the body is almost nothing. A century in your world is but a flash in eternity. The sufferings that last a few of your months or days are nothing, and are only a lesson that will serve you in the future. Spirits, who have pre-existed and have survived everything else, comprise the real world, see number 85. They are the children of God and the objects of the divine kindness. Bodies are no more than disguises behind which they make their appearance in the world. In the great calamities that decimate humankind, those who succumb are like an army during war, witnessing their uniforms become tattered, worn out, or lost. The general is more concerned for his soldiers than their uniforms.
But aren't the victims of these calamities actual victims nonetheless?
If we considered life as it is in itself, and how insignificant it is in comparison with the infinite, the less importance we would attach to it. In another life, those victims will find ample compensation for their sufferings if they endured them without complaining.
Are destructive calamities useful from a physical point of view, notwithstanding the hardships they cause?
Yes, they sometimes modify the conditions of a region, but the good that results from them is usually only felt by future generations.
Couldn't calamities also be moral trials for humankind by exposing humans to the most afflictive needs?
Calamities are trials that furnish humans with an opportunity to exert their intelligence and to demonstrate their patience and resignation before the will of God. At the same time, calamities enable them to develop the sentiments of self-denial, self-detachment, and love for their neighbor if they are not dominated by selfishness.
War.
What is the cause that leads humankind to war?
The predominance of the animal nature over the spiritual and the satisfaction of their passions. In the state of barbarity, nations only know right by might, and that is why war is a normal state for them. As humans evolve, war will become less frequent since they will avoid its causes, and when it does become necessary, they will know how to make it more humane.
Will war someday disappear from the earth?
Yes, when men and women understand justice and practice God's law, then all nations will live as brothers and sisters.
What has been the goal of Providence in making war necessary?
Freedom and progress.
If war is meant to bring freedom, why is it that it has usually had subjugation as its objective and result?
Temporary subjugation makes people weary, thus becoming a catalyst for progress.
What is to be thought about those who stir up war for their own gain?
They are truly guilty and will require many lives to expiate all the murders they have caused, for they will have to answer for every individual whose death they caused to satisfy their own ambition.
Murder.
Is murder a crime in God's sight?
Yes, a great crime, because those who take the life of another fellow being thereby cut short a life of expiation or mission, hence the evil.
Is there always the same degree of culpability in murder?
We have already said, God is just. God judges the intent rather than the deed.
Does God excuse murder in cases of legitimate defense?
Only necessity can excuse it. But if we can save our life without having to take the life of the aggressor, we must do so.
Are persons culpable for the murders they commit in war?
Not if they are coerced through force. Nonetheless, they are responsible for the cruelties they commit. Likewise, their display of humaneness will also be taken into account.
Which is more culpable in God's sight, parricide or infanticide?
They are both equally culpable, for all crime is crime.
Why is infanticide a custom condoned by legislation among certain cultures that are already evolved from an intellectual perspective?
Intellectual development does not necessarily imply moral development. A spirit of superior intelligence may be a bad spirit. It has lived many lives without improving itself morally, gaining only knowledge.
Cruelty.
May we link the sentiment of cruelty to the instinct of destruction?
It is the destruction instinct in its worst form, because Even though destruction is sometimes necessary, cruelty never is. It is always the result of a wicked nature.
Why is cruelty the dominant characteristic of primitive peoples?
Among primitive peoples, as you call them matter, dominates spirit. They abandon themselves to their animal instincts, and since they do not have any other needs beyond those of the body, they care only about their own self-preservation. This is what usually makes them cruel. Moreover, peoples of imperfect development are under the dominion of equally imperfect spirits. These imperfect spirits remain sympathetic to them until more highly advanced peoples come to destroy or weaken their influence.
Why is it that in the most advanced civilizations there are individuals who are at times as cruel as barbarians?
For the same reason that on a tree loaded with good fruit there is always some that is rotten. Such individuals have, if you wish, only the appearance of civility, wolves among the sheep. Low order, very backward spirits may incarnate among advanced people in the hope of their own progress. However, if the trial is too difficult, their barbaric nature prevails.
Will the society of moral individuals someday be purged of evildoers?
Humankind is evolving. Those who are dominated by the instinct of evil and who are out of place among moral people will disappear little by little like bad grain being separated from the good when threshed, but they will be born again in other envelopes. Then, with more experience, they will comprehend good and evil better. You have an example in the plants and animals that you have learned how to perfect by developing new qualities in them. Very well, it is only after many generations that perfection becomes complete. This is a picture of the different existences of human beings.
Dueling.
Can dueling be considered a case of lawful self-defense?
No, it is murder and an absurd custom worthy of barbarians. In a more advanced and moral civilization, people will understand that dueling is as foolish as the combats of antiquity that were regarded as the judgment of God.
Can dueling be considered as murder on the part of him who, knowing his own weakness, is almost certain to be killed? It is suicide.
It is suicide.
And when the odds are equal, is it murder or suicide?
It is both.
In dueling, what is the value of what is called the point of honor?
That of pride and vanity, two sores of humankind.
But aren't there cases in which honor really is at stake and where refusal would be cowardice?
It depends on customs and usages. Each country and each epoch has a different way of regarding such matters. Nevertheless, when human beings are better and more advanced morally, they will understand that the true point of honor is above earthly passions, and that it is neither by killing nor by getting themselves killed that a wrong is redeemed.
The death penalty.
Will the death penalty someday disappear from human legislation?
The death penalty will assuredly disappear, and its demise will signal progress for humankind. When humans become more enlightened, the death penalty will be completely abolished on the earth. They will no longer need to be judged by others. I speak of a time which is still very distant for you.
The law of self-preservation gives us the right to defend our own life. Doesn't this right apply when we eliminate a dangerous member from society?
There are other means of saving yourselves from danger without killing. Moreover, it is necessary to open the door of repentance to the criminal rather than to close it.
Although the death penalty may be banned from civilized societies, wasn't it necessary in less advanced times?
Necessary is not the right word. People always think a thing is necessary when they cannot find anything better. But as they become enlightened, they better understand what is just or unjust, and they repudiate the excesses committed in times of ignorance in the name of justice.
Is the restriction on cases in which the death penalty is applied an indication of the progress of civilization?
How can you doubt that? Does your spirit not revolt when you read the reports of the human slaughters that were formerly perpetrated in the name of justice and frequently in honor of the divinity? Of the tortures to which the condemned and even the accused were submitted in order to wrest from them, through excess pain, a confession for a crime that they very often had not even committed? Well then, if you had lived in those times, you would have thought that it was all quite natural, and perhaps as a judge you would have acted likewise. It is thus that what seems just in one era seems barbaric in another. Only the divine laws are eternal. Human laws change with progress, and they will change further until they have been put in harmony with the divine laws.
Jesus said, "Whoever kills by the sword shall perish by the sword." Don't these words represent the consecration of the penalty of talion? And isn't the death imposed on the murderer an application of this penalty?
Be careful. You are as mistaken about these words as you are about many others. The penalty of talion is the justice of God. It is God Himself who applies it. You all suffer this penalty at every moment because you are punished, wherein you have sinned, either in this life or in another. Those who have caused their fellow humans to suffer will be in a situation in which they themselves will suffer in like manner. This is the meaning of Jesus' words. Didn't He also say to you, "Forgive your enemies"? And didn't He teach you to ask God to forgive your offenses as you yourself forgive, that is, in the same proportion in which you yourself have forgiven? Understand this well.
What about the death penalty imposed in the name of God?
It is equivalent to taking God's place in the practice of justice. Those who act thus reveal how far they are from actually understanding God and how much they still have to expiate. The death penalty is a crime when it is applied in the name of God, and those who do so will be held responsible for every murder.
Chapter 7. The Law of Society. The need for societal life.
Is societal life natural?
Certainly, God has made humans for living in society. Otherwise, it would have been needless for God to have endowed them with speech and all the other faculties necessary for a life of relationships.
Is absolute isolation contrary to the law of nature?
Yes, because people instinctively seek societal living, and because all of them must cooperate in humankind's progress by mutually helping one another.
In seeking societal living, do people only obey a personal sentiment, or is there a wider providential purpose involved?
Humans must progress. They cannot do so alone, however, since they do not all possess every faculty they need contact with others. In isolation, they become brutish and withered.
The life of isolation. The vow of silence.
We can understand that as a general principle societal life is founded on the laws of nature. But since all tastes are also natural, why would a taste for absolute isolation be condemnable if someone finds satisfaction in it?
Selfish satisfaction. There are also those who find satisfaction in drunkenness. Do you approve of that? God cannot consider as pleasing a life in which persons condemn themselves to being useless to everyone.
What is to be thought of those who live in absolute seclusion in order to escape the pernicious contact of the world?
Doubly selfish.
But if such seclusion has expiation as its purpose through the imposition of harsh privations, isn't it meritorious?
Doing mostly good rather than evil is the best expiation. Through such seclusion they avoid one evil only to fall into another, since they neglect the law of love and charity.
What should we think of those who renounce the world in order to devote themselves to the relief of the unfortunate?
They evolve by putting others' needs before their own. They have the double merit of placing themselves above material pleasures and of doing good by fulfilling the law of labor.
And those who withdraw to seek the tranquility required for certain kinds of labor?
That is not the complete withdrawal of the selfish individual. They do not isolate themselves from society because they labor for it.
What is to be thought of the vow of silence that has been prescribed by certain sects since remotest antiquity?
You might as well ask whether speech is natural and why God has given it. God condemns the abuse rather than the use of divinely granted faculties. Nevertheless, silence is useful at times because in silence you can compose yourself. Your spirit becomes freer and can enter into communication with us. However, a vow of silence is foolishness. Undoubtedly, those who regard such privations as acts of virtue have good intentions, but they are mistaken by not sufficiently understanding the true laws of God.
Family ties.
Why is it that among the animals, parents and offspring no longer recognize each other when the latter no longer need care?
Animals live a material life, not a moral life. A mother's tenderness for her young has as its principle the instinct of preservation regarding the beings born to her. When these beings are able to take care of themselves, her task is fulfilled and nature requires no more of her. Thus she abandons them in order to occupy herself with more newborns.
There are persons who infer from animals' abandonment of their offspring that the family ties among humans are merely a result of social customs and not a law of nature. What should we make of this?
Human beings have a different destiny than that of the animals, so why do you always want to identify with them? For humans, there is something beyond physical needs. There is the need to progress. Social ties are necessary for progress, and family ties strengthen social ties. Hence, family ties are a law of nature. God has thus willed that humans learn to love one another as brothers and sisters.
What would be the result for society if family ties were relaxed?
A magnification of selfishness.
Chapter 8. The Law of Progress. The state of nature.
Are the state of nature and natural law the same thing?
No, the state of nature is the primitive state. Civilization is incompatible with the state of nature, whereas natural law contributes to the progress of humankind.
Since there are fewer needs in the state of nature, human beings do not suffer all the tribulations they create for themselves in.
What do you expect? That sort of happiness is the ignorant happiness of the brute. There are humans who understand no other. It is being happy in the same sort of way as are the animals. Children, too, are happier than when they become adults.
Could humankind regress back to the state of nature?
No, humankind must progress without ceasing, and it cannot return to the state of infancy. It progresses because God has willed it. Believing that it could regress back to its primitive condition would be denying the law of progress.
The march of progress.
Do humans draw from within themselves the power to progress, or is progress nothing more than the result of education?
They advance naturally by themselves. Not all progress at the same time or in the same manner, however, and it is through social contact that the most advanced help the others to progress.
Does moral progress always follow intellectual progress?
It is its consequence, but it does not always follow it immediately.
How can intellectual progress lead to moral progress?
By making good and evil understandable, for then humans can choose between the two. The development of free will follows the development of intelligence and increases the responsibility of humans for their acts.
Then how can one explain that the most enlightened cultures are often the most perverted?
Complete progress is the goal, but like individuals, cultures only reach it step by step. Until they have developed the moral sense, they may use their intelligence to do evil. Morality and intelligence are two forces that only achieve balance over time.
Is humankind ever permitted to halt the march of progress?
No, but it can sometimes slow it down.
What are we to think of those who attempt to halt the march of progress and cause humankind to regress?
They are poor, conceited beings whom God will chastise, and they will be swept away by the torrent they meant to stop.
Aren't there those who obstruct progress out of good faith, believing they are helping it because from their own point of view they often see progress where it does not in fact exist?
They are like a tiny pebble under the wheel of a large cart. A tiny pebble cannot keep a large cart from moving.
Does the perfecting of humankind always follow a slow progressive march?
There is the regular, slow progress that results from the force of things. However, when a culture does not advance quickly enough, then from time to time, God causes a physical or moral jolt that transforms it.
Humankind's perversity is very great. Doesn't it seem like humans are regressing instead of progressing, at least from a moral point of view?
You are mistaken. Observe the whole closely, and you will see that they are advancing because they have a better understanding of what evil is, leading them day by day to reform their abuses. The excess of evil will make them understand the need for the good and for reforms.
Relapsed cultures.
History has shown us many cultures that relapsed into barbarity after shocking events deeply upset them. Where is the progress in such a case?
When your house threatens to collapse, you demolish it in order to build a stronger and more comfortable one. Until it is rebuilt, however, there is trouble and confusion in your dwelling. A further example, you are poor and live in a hovel, but you become wealthy and leave it to live in a palace. Then some poor fellow, as you formerly were, comes and takes your place in the hovel and feels very content because he previously had no shelter at all. Very well. Learn from this that the spirits incarnated in those declining cultures are no longer the spirits who had comprised them during their time of splendor. Because they have progressed, those former spirits have moved into even more perfect dwellings, while less advanced ones have taken their place, which they too will leave behind in their turn.
Aren't there peoples that by their very nature rebel against progress?
Yes, but they are corporeally disappearing day by day.
What will be the future fate of the souls who animate those peoples?
Like all other souls, they will finally arrive at perfection by passing through other existences. God deserts no one.
So the most civilized individuals may have been primitive beings and cannibals?
You yourselves were such more than once before becoming what you are now.
Like individuals, cultures are collective individualities that pass through childhood, adulthood, and decrepitude. Since this truth is attested to by history, does it not lead us to assume that the most advanced cultures of this century will decline and end just as those of antiquity?
Those cultures that only live a material existence and whose greatness is founded only upon power and territorial expansion are born, grow, and die out because the might of a culture exhausts itself, just like that of an individual. Cultures with selfish laws that clash with the progress of enlightenment and charity die out because light annihilates darkness and charity eradicates selfishness. However, for cultures, as for individuals, there is the life of the soul, and cultures with laws that are in harmony with the eternal laws of the Creator will live and will be guiding lights for other cultures.
Will progress someday unite all of Earth's peoples into a single nation?
Not into a single nation. That would be impossible, because nationalities are formed based on different customs and needs arising from the diversity in climates, and their local laws are designed to accommodate such customs and needs. Charity, on the other hand, knows nothing of geographical latitudes and does not differentiate people by their color. When the law of God comprises the basis of human law everywhere, cultures and individuals will practice the law of charity toward each other, living joyfully and peacefully because no one will attempt to deceive their neighbor or live at his or her expense.
Civilization.
Does civilization represent progress for humankind, or does it represent decadence, as some philosophers profess?
Incomplete progress because humankind does not pass suddenly from infancy to maturity.
Is it reasonable to condemn civilization?
Instead, condemn those who abuse it. Do not condemn the work of God.
Will civilization be purified one day so that the evils it has produced will disappear?
Yes, when morality is as developed as intelligence, the fruit cannot come before the blossom.
Why doesn't civilization immediately effectuate all the good it could produce?
Because humans are not yet ready or disposed to obtain that good.
Wouldn't it also be because in creating new needs it incites new passions?
Yes, and because all of a spirit's faculties do not evolve in tandem, everything takes time. You cannot expect perfect fruit from an imperfect civilization.
The progress of human legislation.
Could society be governed solely by natural laws without having to resort to human laws?
It could, if humans understood them well enough, if they were to actually practice them, such laws would be sufficient. Society, however, has its requirements and needs special laws.
What causes the instability of human laws?
In times of barbarity, the strongest are the ones who make the laws and they frame them to their own advantage. It becomes necessary to modify them as humans comprehend justice more clearly. Human laws become more stable as they move toward true justice, that is to say, to the degree that they are made for all and as they are aligned with natural law.
Aren't harsh criminal laws a necessity in the present state of society?
A depraved society has a need for harsher laws. Unfortunately, such laws are meant to punish a wrong after it has already been committed, rather than to cut out the roots of what has caused the wrong. Only education can reform humankind, which will then have no more need of such harsh laws.
How can humankind be led to reform its laws?
This will occur naturally through the force of circumstances and by the influence of moral persons who will guide it along the path of progress. Many things have already been reformed, and many more will be. Wait a while.
Spiritism's influence on progress.
Will Spiritism become a common belief, or will it only be accepted by a few?
It will certainly become a common belief and will mark a new era in the history of humankind, for it belongs to nature itself. In fact, the time has come in which it must take its place among the other branches of human knowledge. It will nevertheless have to withstand great struggles more against personal interests than against conviction, because you must not ignore the fact that there are persons interested in fighting it, some out of self-centeredness, others from purely material motives. Its opponents, however, will become more and more isolated and will finally be forced to think like the others, lest they make themselves look foolish.
Shouldn't we perhaps fear that Spiritism may not be able to defeat humans' indifference and their attachment to material things?
To suppose that any cause could act as some kind of magic spell to transform humans would be to know very little about them. Individuals' ideas are modified little by little, and generations are needed to completely erase old habits. Transformation, therefore, can only be realized with time, gradually, step by step. With each new generation, a part of the veil has been lifted, and Spiritism has now come to remove it once and for all. In the meantime, even if it had the effect of correcting one defect of only one person, it would be a step for that person, and therefore a great good, since that first step would make further ones easier.
Why haven't the spirits taught from the earliest times what they are teaching today?
You do not teach to children the same things you teach to adults, just as you do not give newborns food they cannot digest. Each thing has its own time. The spirits taught many things that humans distorted or did not understand, but which they are now capable of comprehending. Even though their teaching was incomplete, they prepared the soil to receive the seed which is now about to bear fruit.
Since Spiritism must mark a step in the progress of humankind, why don't the spirits speed up this progress through manifestations that are so widespread and patent that they could lead the most incredulous to believe?
You desire miracles, but God has sown them by the handful right under your feet, yet you still have people who deny them. Did Christ himself convince his contemporaries by the wonders he performed? Even today, do you not see those who deny the most obvious facts occurring under their very eyes? Are there not those who would not believe even if they did see them? No, it is not by miracles that God guides humankind. Out of divine goodness, God wishes to leave to it the merit of being convinced through reason.
Chapter 9. The Law of Equality. Natural equality.
Are all people equal before God?
Yes, all are heading towards the same goal. God has made the divine laws for everybody. You often say, the sun shines the same on everyone, and you thereby state a greater and more general truth than you might think.
The inequality of aptitudes.
Why hasn't God endowed everyone with the same aptitudes?
God has created all spirits equal, but each one of them has lived over a longer or shorter amount of time and has consequently developed more or fewer aptitudes. The difference lies in the degree of experience and volition, their free will, by which some advance more rapidly, endowing them with a wide range of aptitudes. A medley of aptitudes is necessary, so that all may contribute to the designs of providence within the limits of the development of their physical and intellectual powers. What one cannot do, another does, and so all end up having their useful function. Furthermore, since all worlds are united in solidarity, it is necessary for the inhabitants of more highly evolved worlds, most of which were created well before yours, to come and live here in order to set an example for you.
In passing from a more evolved world to a lesser one, does the spirit keep all of its acquired faculties intact?
Yes, we have already told you that the spirit who has progressed cannot regress. In its spirit state, it may choose a coarser envelope or a more precarious position than the previous one, but always to serve it as a lesson and to help it progress.
Social inequalities.
Is the inequality of social conditions a law of nature?
No, it is the work of humankind, not of God.
What about those who abuse the superiority of their social position by oppressing the weak for their own gain?
They are to be lamented, those wretched beings. They will be oppressed in their turn, and they will be reborn into an existence in which they will suffer everything they caused others to suffer.
The inequality of wealth.
Doesn't the inequality of wealth originate in the inequality of faculties, which give to some persons more means of acquiring things than other persons?
Yes and no. What would you say about fraud and robbery?
But inherited wealth is not the fruit of bad passions.
How do you know it is not? Go back to its origin to find out if it is pure. Do you know whether or not, if at its source it was the fruit of spoliation or injustice? But apart from the issue of its possible wrongful origin, do you believe that the longing for wealth, even when honestly acquired, and the secret longing conceived to possess it as soon as possible, are laudable sentiments? That is what God judges, and I can assure you that the divine judgment is stricter than that of humans.
If a fortune has been wrongly acquired to start with, are the heirs later responsible for this?
Of course, they are not responsible for the wrong that others committed, especially if they are ignorant of it. But you should know that a fortune is often destined for certain individuals in order to provide them the opportunity to repair an injustice. Happy for them if they comprehend this. If they repair the injustice in the name of the one who committed it in the first place, the reparation will be taken into account for everyone concerned, because it is almost always the original wrongdoer who, from the spirit world, inspires them to do it.
We may dispose of our assets more equitably or less equitably without breaking the law. Thus, are we responsible for our testamentary dispositions after death?
Every action bears its own fruit. The fruit of good deeds is sweet, whereas the fruit of other deeds is always bitter. Always bear this in mind.
Is absolute equality of wealth possible, and has it ever existed?
No, it is not possible. The diversity of faculties and characters opposes it.
Nevertheless, there are those who believe it to be the remedy for all social ills. What do you think of that?
Either they are framers of theories, or they are ambitious and envious. They do not understand that equality would be quickly broken by the very force of things. Fight selfishness, for that is your social plague. Do not chase chimeras.
If equality of wealth is not possible, does the same apply to well-being?
No, but well-being is relative, and everyone could enjoy it if humans understood each other better. For true well-being consists in employing one's time according to one's liking, and not in working at something one does not enjoy. Since everyone has different aptitudes, no useful work would therefore be left undone. Equilibrium exists in everything. Humans are the ones who upset it.
Is it possible for everyone to understand one another?
Humans will understand one another when they practice the law of justice.
There are persons who fall into deprivation and poverty through their own fault. May society be held responsible for this?
Yes, we have already told you that society is often the primary cause of such wrongs. Is it not society's responsibility to attend to the moral education of its members? It is frequently bad education that distorts these persons' judgment instead of stifling their harmful tendencies.
The trials of wealth and poverty.
Why has God bestowed wealth and power on some and poverty on others?
In order to test everyone differently. Moreover, as you know, such trials are chosen by the spirits themselves, and they often fail at them.
Which of the two trials is more dangerous to humans? Poverty or wealth?
They are equally dangerous. Poverty provokes complaining against providence, whereas wealth incites all kinds of excesses.
If the wealthy endure more temptations, don't they also have the means at their disposal for doing more good?
That is precisely what they do not always do. They become selfish, proud, and insatiable. Their wants increase with their fortune, and they never think they have enough.
Equality of the rights between men and women.
Are men and women equal before God, and do they have the same rights?
Has not God given them both the knowledge of good and evil, and the faculties for progress?
Where does the moral inferiority of women in certain regions come from?
From the unjust and cruel dominion that men have exerted over them. It is a result of social institutions and the abuse of strength over weakness. Among men who have not advanced very much from the moral point of view, might makes right.
Doesn't women's physical weakness make them naturally dependent on men?
God has given strength to some in order to protect the weak, not to enslave them.
Are the functions for which women are intended by nature as important as those conferred upon men?
Yes, and even greater women give men the first notions of life.
Since all people are equals before God's law, shouldn't they also be equals before human law?
This is the first principle of justice. Do not do unto others what you would not want them to do unto you.
Accordingly, in order for legislation to be perfectly just, shouldn't it consecrate the equality of rights between men and women?
Equality of rights, yes. Of functions, no. All persons must have their place. Let men take care of external aspects, and women take care of internal aspects, each according to their own aptitude. In order to be just, human law must consecrate the equality of rights between men and women. Any special privilege granted to one and not the other is contrary to justice. The emancipation of women accompanies the progress of civilization. Their servitude is in step with barbarity. Besides, gender exists only in the physical organization, and since spirits can become either, there are no differences between them in this respect. Consequently, they should enjoy the same rights.
Equality in death.
Where does the desire to perpetuate one's memory on funeral monuments come from?
The last act of pride.
But isn't the pompousness of funeral monuments most frequently determined by relatives who desire to honor the memory of the deceased, rather than the deceased him or herself?
It is the pride of the relatives who want honor for themselves. It is not always for the deceased that all these demonstrations are made, but for vanity, for consideration by the world, and for parading their wealth. Do you believe that the memory of loved ones is less lasting in the hearts of the poor, just because they can only place one flower on their loved ones' graves? Do you believe that marble can save from forgottenness those who had been useless while on earth?
Is funeral pomp completely reproachable?
No. When it honors the memory of a moral person, it is just and sets a good example.
Chapter 10. The Law of Freedom. Natural freedom.
Are there positions in the world in which persons can flatter themselves by believing they are enjoying absolute freedom?
No, because all of you, the least as well as the greatest, need one another.
What would be a condition in which humans could enjoy absolute freedom?
That of a hermit in the desert. As soon as two individuals are brought together, there are rights to respect, and they no longer have absolute freedom.
Does the duty of respecting the rights of others deprive individuals of the rights pertaining to themselves?
Absolutely not, for they are rights that have been granted to them by nature.
How can we reconcile the liberal opinions of certain men with their frequent despotism in their own homes and over their subordinates?
In these instances, although they have an intellectual understanding of natural law, it is offset by pride and selfishness. They know what they should do if their principles are not a well-calculated farce, but they do not do it in practice.
Will the principles they have professed during this life be taken into account in the next?
The more intelligence individuals have for understanding a principle, the less excusable they will be if they have not applied it to themselves. I tell you truthfully that simple but sincere persons are more advanced on God's pathway than those who try to appear to be what they in fact are not.
Slavery.
Are there human beings who are meant by nature to be the property of others?
Every instance of subjection of one human being to another is contrary to the law of God. Slavery is an abuse of power and will gradually disappear with progress, as will all other abuses.
When slavery belongs to the customs of a culture, are those who practice it reprehensible since they are doing nothing more than following a usage that seems natural to them?
Evil is always evil. All your sophistry will not render an evil action good. However, the responsibility for evil is relative to the means at your disposal to comprehend it. Those who use the law of slavery are always guilty of violating the law of nature, but in this, as in all things, the guilt is relative. Because slavery was a custom among certain cultures, people practiced it in good faith as something that seemed natural to them. But their reason, more developed and especially enlightened by the teachings of Christianity, eventually showed them that the slave was their equal before God. Then they no longer had an excuse.
Doesn't the natural inequality of aptitudes place certain peoples under the subjection of the more intelligent ones?
Yes, in order to enable them to develop, but not to demean them still further by slavery. Human beings have long regarded certain races as domesticated beasts of burden equipped with arms and hands, and have thought that they had the right to sell them as such. They have considered themselves to be of purer blood. The folly of those who do not look beyond matter. It is not the blood that is purer or less pure, but the spirit.
There are those who treat their slaves humanely, who see to it that they lack nothing, and who think that freedom would expose them to even greater deprivations. What do you say about them?
I say that they understand their own interests very well. They also show the same care for their cattle and horses in order to get more profit at market. They are not as culpable as those who mistreat their slaves, but they use them as merchandise, nonetheless, depriving them of the right to belong to themselves.
Freedom of thought.
Is there something in human beings which escapes all constraint, and through which they enjoy absolute freedom?
It is through thought that they enjoy unlimited freedom, for thought knows no obstacles. Its manifestation may be hindered, but not erased.
Are humans responsible for their thoughts?
They are responsible before God. God alone can know their thoughts and condemn or absolve them according to divine justice.
Freedom of conscience.
Is freedom of conscience a consequence of freedom of thought?
Conscience is an inner thought that belongs to persons, as do all their other thoughts.
Do humans have the right to set up barriers to freedom of conscience?
No more so than to freedom of thought, because God alone has the right to judge the conscience. If humans use their laws to regulate relations between individuals, God uses the laws of nature to regulate relations between individuals and God.
Is every belief respectable even when notoriously wrong-headed?
Every belief is respectable when it is sincere and leads to the practice of the good. Reproachable beliefs are those that lead to evil.
Are we blameworthy when we offend the beliefs of someone who does not think like us?
It shows a lack of charity and goes against freedom of thought.
Does it go against freedom of conscience to obstruct beliefs that might disturb society?
Acts may be restrained, but inner belief is untouchable.
Out of respect for freedom of conscience, should we allow the propagation of harmful doctrines, or may we, without going against such freedom, seek to lead back onto the path of truth those who have been led astray by erroneous principles?
Certainly you may, and you should, but follow the example of Jesus. Teach by gentleness and persuasion, and not by force, since that would be worse than the belief of the one whom you desired to convince. If there is something that should be allowed to be imposed, which is goodness and fraternity, but we do not believe the means for doing so is violence, conviction cannot be forcefully imposed.
Since all doctrines claim to be the sole expression of the truth, by what signs can we recognize which one actually has the right to be presented as such?
It will be the one that produces the fewest hypocrites and the greatest number of moral individuals, which means they practice the law of love and charity in its greatest purity and widest application. By this sign you will recognize which doctrine is good, because those doctrines that result in sowing disunion and establishing divisions among God's children can be only erroneous and harmful.
Free will.
Do humans act with free will?
Since they have freedom of thought, they have freedom of action. Without free will, human beings would be machines.
Do people enjoy free will from the moment of birth?
They have the freedom to act from the moment they have a will to act. During the first phases of life, freedom is almost non-existent. It develops and changes its objectives as the faculties develop. Since the thoughts of children are in proportion to the needs of their age, they apply their free will to things that are necessary for them.
Aren't the instinctive predispositions that individuals bring at birth an obstacle to the exercise of their free will?
Instinctive predispositions arise from those of the spirit before its incarnation. Depending on how much the spirit has evolved, these predispositions can incite the individual to reprehensible acts in which he or she will be aided by spirits who sympathize with such dispositions. However, there is no irresistible incitement if the individual has the will to resist. Remember, where there is a will, there is a way.
Doesn't our organism have an influence on our actions in life? So, isn't it at the expense of our free will?
The spirit is certainly influenced by matter, which may hinder its manifestations. That is why, on worlds where bodies are less material than on Earth, the faculties unfold with more freedom. However, the instrument does not give faculties to the spirit. Furthermore, in this case, it is necessary to distinguish between moral faculties and intellectual faculties. If individuals have an instinct for murder, it is assuredly their own spirit that possesses it, and which transmits it to them. It never arises due to their bodily organs. Those who suppress their thought in order to occupy themselves with matter become like an animal, and even worse, since they no longer think about being on guard against evil, it is in this that they become culpable because they act in this manner of their own free will.
Can a distortion of the faculties deprive humans of their free will?
Those whose intelligence is impaired by any cause are no longer in complete control of their thought, and thereafter they have no more freedom. Such distortion is frequently a punishment for the spirit, who might have been vain and proud and might have made bad use of its faculties in another existence. It may be reborn in the body of someone who is mentally impaired, as the despot in the body of a slave, and the spiteful wealthy person in that of a beggar. The spirit, however, is perfectly conscious of such constraint and suffers from it. It is in this constraint that one sees the action of matter.
Does the distortion of the intellectual faculties because of drunkenness excuse reprehensible acts?
No, because drunkards intentionally deprive themselves of their reason in order to satisfy their crude passions. Instead of one wrong, they commit two.
In humans in the primitive state, what is the dominant faculty? Instinct or free will?
Instinct, although it does not impede their acting with entire freedom in certain things. Like children, they first apply this freedom to their needs. It develops later through intelligence. Consequently, you, who are more enlightened than primitive peoples, are more responsible for your acts than they are.
Isn't social position sometimes an obstacle to full freedom of action?
The world undoubtedly has its demands. God is just and takes everything into account, but holds you responsible for the paltry efforts you make to overcome such obstacles.
Fatalism.
Is there fatalism in the events of life according to the usual meaning attached to the word? That is, are all events predetermined, and if so, what becomes of free will?
Fatalism only exists when applied to the choice made by spirits upon incarnating to undergo this or that trial. Upon choosing a particular trial, they delineate for themselves a kind of destiny, which is the proper consequence of the position in which they now find themselves. I am referring only to trials of a physical nature. As for moral trials and temptations, spirits preserve their free will to choose good or evil, and they are always able to yield or resist. When good spirits see individuals lose courage, they may rush to their aid, but they cannot influence them to the point of eclipsing their will. A bad spirit, that is, a low-order one, can disturb and frighten them by exacerbating a physical danger. Whatever the circumstances, however, the incarnate spirit still retains its entire freedom of choice.
There are persons who seem to be pursued by fatalism no matter what they do. Is it their destiny to be unfortunate?
There may be trials which they must endure and which they themselves have chosen. Once more you blame fate, which is almost always a consequence of your own deeds. In the midst of the hardships afflicting you, make sure your conscience is clear. You will then feel partially consoled.
There are persons who escape one mortal danger only to fall into another. They seem unable to escape death. Isn't there fatalism in this?
Fatalism, in the true meaning of the word, applies only to the instant of death. When that moment arrives in one form or another, you cannot escape it.
Then whatever may be the danger that threatens us, we will not die if our hour has not come.
No, you will not die, and you have thousands of examples. But when your hour for departure comes, nothing will save you. God knows beforehand what kind of death will cause your departure, and frequently your spirit also knows it because it was revealed to it when it made the choice of this or that existence.
From the infallibility of the hour of death, does it follow that the precautions taken to avoid it are useless?
No, because the precautions you take are suggested to you in order to avoid the death that could result from the dangers that threaten you. They are one of the means used so that it does not occur.
What is the intent of Providence in making us incur dangers that will have no result?
When your life is in danger, it is a warning that you yourself have desired in order to turn you from wrongdoing and to enable you to become better. Once you escape this danger, and while still under the influence of the risk you incurred, you consider with greater or lesser intensity, depending on the strength of the action of good spirits, to become a better person. However, once the bad spirits, I say bad in reference to the badness that is still in them, return, you think that you can dodge other dangers just as easily, and you allow your passions to be unleashed once more. Through the dangers you incur, God reminds you of your weakness and the fragility of your existence. If we examine the cause and nature of any danger, we will see that in the majority of cases, the consequences are punishment for some wrong committed or a duty neglected. God thus warns you to reflect on and correct your wrongs.
Does the spirit know beforehand what kind of death it will suffer?
It knows that the kind of life it has chosen will expose it to dying more probably in one way than in another, but it also knows which struggles it will have to sustain in order to avoid it, and if God so wills, it will not succumb.
There are soldiers who brave the perils of combat with a certain conviction that their hour has not yet come. Is there any foundation for such confidence?
Quite frequently, individuals have a presentiment of their end, and thus they may have a presentiment that they will not die yet. This presentiment is given to them by their protector spirit, who desires to warn them in order for them to be ready to depart, or in order to rebuild their courage at times when it becomes necessary. It may also come to them from their own intuition of the life they have chosen or of the mission they have accepted, and which they know they must fulfill.
Why do those who foresee their death generally dread it less than others?
It is the individual who dreads death, not the spirit. Those who foresee it think more as a spirit rather than as a physical entity. They understand their deliverance and they wait for it.
If death cannot be avoided when our hour arrives, is it the same in regard to all the accidents that occur over the course of our life?
They are generally small enough matters about which we can warn you by directing your thought in such a way that you may avoid them, for we do not like physical suffering. However, this is of little importance for the course of the life you have chosen. Actually, bona fide fatalism applies only at the times when you must enter and depart this world.
Are there events which must necessarily occur, and which the will of the spirits cannot avert?
Yes, but which you, when in the spirit state, foresaw and anticipated upon making your choice. However, do not believe that everything that happens to you is written, as some say. An event is almost always the consequence of something you have done by an act of your own free will in such a way that if you had not done so, the event would not have occurred. If you burn your finger, it is only the consequence of your imprudence and the condition of matter. Only the great sorrows, those important events that are capable of influencing your moral evolution, are foreseen by God because they are useful for your purification and education.
Can humans, through their own will and efforts, avoid events that were to occur and vice versa?
They can, if this apparent deviation fits into the general order of the life that they have chosen. Furthermore, in doing good their duty and the sole purpose of life, they can prevent evil, especially that which might contribute to a still greater evil.
Upon choosing their existence, do those who commit a murder know at the time that they would become murderers?
No. They only know that in choosing a life of struggle they will incur the probability of killing one of their fellow beings, but they do not know if they will actually do so or not. Murderers will almost always deliberate in their minds before committing the crime, and those who deliberate about something are always free to do it or not. If spirits knew beforehand that as individuals they would have to commit a murder, it would mean they were predestined to do so. However, you should be very clear about the fact that no one is ever predestined to commit a crime, and that every crime, like any and every other act, is always the result of volition and free will. Moreover, you always confuse two very distinct things: the material events of existence and the moral acts of life. If there is sometimes fatalism, it only applies to material events where the cause is outside of you and independent of your will. As for the acts of the moral life, they always emanate from the individual him or herself, who therefore always has the freedom of choice. There is never fatalism in such acts.
There are those who never manage to succeed who seem to be pursued by a bad influence in all their undertakings. Isn't this what we could call fatalism?
It could be fatalism, if you would like to call it that, but it results from the choice of the kind of existence. Such individuals wanted to experience a life full of disappointment in order to exercise their patience and resignation. However, you must not believe that this fatalism is always unavoidable. It is often only the result of their having taken a wrong path that is not in keeping with their intelligence and aptitudes. Someone who tries to swim across a river without knowing how to swim stands a very good chance of drowning. It is the same in most events of life. If people did not try to undertake more than what was in keeping with their own faculties, they would always succeed. What causes their failure are their self-centeredness and ambition, which divert them from their proper path and make them consider a vocation that entails nothing but the desire to satisfy certain passions. They then fail, and it is their own fault. But instead of recognizing their error, they prefer to blame their horoscope. For instance, a man would have been a good workman making an honorable living, but he became a bad poet instead and died of hunger. There would be a place for everybody if each one knew how to occupy his or her own niche.
Don't social customs often obligate people to follow a certain path rather than another? And aren't they subject to the influence of others' opinions in their choice of occupation? Isn't what we call human respect actually an obstacle to the exercise of our free will?
Social customs are made by humans, not by God. If they submit to them, it is because they suit them. This is also an act of free will, because if they wanted to, they could reject them. So why do they complain? They should not accuse social customs, but their own foolish vanity, which leads them to prefer to die of hunger rather than infringe upon such customs. Nobody takes this sacrifice to public opinion into account, though God will take into account their sacrifice to their own vanity. This does not mean they should unnecessarily go against public opinion, like certain persons who are more possessed of eccentricity than true philosophy. It is just as absurd to display oneself as an oddity as it is wise to willingly descend the social ladder without complaining if one cannot remain at the top.
If there are persons whom fate seems to be against, others seem to be favored by it because everything goes well for them. To what may this be attributed?
Usually they are better at self-guidance. However, it could also be a kind of trial. Success intoxicates them. They trust in their destiny, and later they frequently pay for their success with cruel reversals that could have been avoided with prudence.
How can we explain the luck that seems to favor certain individuals in circumstances that depend neither on will nor intelligence, games of chance, for example?
Certain spirits have chosen certain types of pleasure beforehand, and the luck that favors them is a temptation. Those who win in the material sense might lose as spirits. It is a trial for their pride and greed.
Then wouldn't the fatalism that seems to preside over our destinies in the material life also be the result of our free will?
You yourselves have chosen your trials. The more difficult they are, and the better you bear them, the more you evolve. Those who spend their lives in the selfish enjoyment of abundance and their own welfare are cowardly spirits who remain at a standstill. Thus, the number of the unfortunate greatly surpasses the fortunate, since the majority of spirits have sought the trials that will be most useful to them. They see too clearly the futility of earthly grandeurs and pleasures. Besides, the most satisfactory life is always full of events and its own problems to solve, even in the absence of suffering.
Where does the expression born under a lucky star come from?
It comes from an old superstition, according to which the stars were connected with the destiny of each human being, an allegory that some people are foolish enough to take literally.
Knowledge of the future.
Can the future be revealed to humans?
In principle, the future is hidden from them, and only in rare and exceptional cases does God permit it to be revealed.
But if it is useful for the future to remain hidden, why does God sometimes allow it to be revealed?
This happens if a particular foreseen event would facilitate the accomplishment of things instead of preventing them, and if it leads individuals to act differently than they would have if the revelation had not been made. Besides, many times it is a trial. The foreknowledge of an event may awaken thoughts that are more virtuous or less so. For instance, if a man knows that he will receive a fortune that he had not expected, he may be taken by the sentiment of greed or elation about the probability of adding to his earthly pleasures. In order to obtain the fortune sooner, he may desire the death of the one who is to leave it to him. On the other hand, perhaps such foreknowledge will awaken good sentiments and generous thoughts in him. If the prediction is not fulfilled, it will be another trial, the way in which he bears the disappointment. Nonetheless, he will have acquired the merit or the blame for the good or bad thoughts that the prediction aroused in him.
Since God knows everything, God knows whether a person will or will not fail at a particular trial. If that is the case, what is the need of the trial in the first place, since it cannot add anything to what God does not already know about that person?
You might as well ask why God did not create human beings perfect and accomplished to begin with, see number 119, or why they must pass through childhood before arriving at adulthood, see number 379. The purpose of a trial is not to enlighten God about what people deserve. God knows perfectly well what they deserve, but to leave them the entire responsibility for their own conduct, since they have the freedom to do or not do. Since they can choose between good and evil, a trial has the purpose of placing them before the temptation of evil, leaving them all the merit for resisting it. Also, even though God knows very well beforehand whether they will triumph or fail, out of divine justice, God can neither punish them nor reward them for an act they have not yet committed.
Chapter 11. The law of justice, love, and charity. Justice and natural rights.
Is the sentiment of justice to be found in nature itself, or is it the result of acquired ideas?
It is so natural that you revolt at the thought of an injustice. Moral progress undoubtedly develops this sentiment, but it does not create it. God has placed it in the human heart. That is why you frequently find among simple and unlearned people notions of justice that are more exact than those among very knowledgeable ones.
If justice is a law of nature, how may it be explained that people understand it so differently, and that what one individual considers just appears unjust to another?
It is because the passions are usually mingled with the sentiment of justice, thereby altering it. The same thing occurs with the majority of the other natural sentiments, and it causes things to be seen from an erroneous point of view.
How may justice be defined?
Justice consists in respecting the rights of every person.
Outside the rights consecrated by human law, what is the basis of justice founded on natural law?
Christ has told you, "Do unto others whatsoever you would have them do unto you." God has placed in the human heart the rule of all true justice through the desire that all deserve to see their rights respected. If you are uncertain of what you should do for your neighbor in any given circumstance, ask yourself what you would want your neighbor to do to you in a similar situation. God could not give you a safer guide than your own conscience.
Does the necessity of living in society impose any special obligations on humankind?
Yes, and the first of all is that of respecting the rights of others. Those who respect the rights of others will always be just. In your world, where so many do not practice the law of justice, everyone resorts to reprisals, and that is what causes trouble and confusion in your society. Social life bestows rights and imposes reciprocal duties.
Since humans can be mistaken as to the extent of their rights, what guideline can enable them to know what limits to set on such rights?
The limit of the right that they recognize for others in relation to themselves under the same circumstances, and vice versa.
But if all attributed to themselves the rights of their neighbor, what becomes of subordination to superiors? Wouldn't that cause anarchy regarding all positions of power?
Natural rights are the same for everybody from the least to the greatest. God has not made some from purer clay than others, and all are equal in the divine sight. These rights are eternal, whereas those established by humans perish with their institutions. Moreover, all individuals sense their own strength or weakness and will always show a certain deference to those who deserve it because of their virtue and wisdom. It is important to point this out so that those who think they are superior may know their responsibilities for deserving such deference. Subordination will never be compromised if authority is in conformance with wisdom.
What would be the character of those who practice justice in all its purity?
They would be truly just and would be following Jesus' example, because they would practice both charity and love towards their neighbor, without which there is no real justice.
The right of ownership. Theft.
Which is the first of all the natural rights of humans.
The right to stay alive. That is why no one has the right to assault a fellow human being's life or to do anything that may compromise his or her corporeal existence.
Does the right to stay alive give them the right to accumulate what is needed to live on and to retire when they can no longer work?
Yes, but they must do this as a family like the bee through honest labor, and not by accumulating assets as selfish individuals. Certain animals set an example of such foresight.
Do humans have the right to defend what they have accumulated through their labor?
Hasn't God said, "Do not steal"? And Jesus, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's"?
Is the desire to possess natural?
Yes, but when humans desire to possess only for themselves and for their own personal satisfaction, it is selfishness.
Nevertheless, isn't the desire to possess legitimate since the one who has enough to live on is not a burden to others?
There are insatiable individuals who accumulate possessions without benefit to anyone else or merely to satisfy their passions. Do you believe that this is approved by God? Those who accumulate assets through their labor with the intention of helping their neighbor practice the law of love and of charity, and their labor is blessed by God.
What is the characteristic of legitimate ownership?
There is only one legitimate ownership: owning something that has been acquired without harm to others.
Charity and love for our neighbor.
What is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood it?
Benevolence toward everyone, indulgence toward the imperfections of others, and forgiveness for offenses.
Jesus also taught, love even your enemies. But isn't loving our enemies contrary to our natural tendencies? And doesn't enmity proceed from a lack of sympathy between spirits?
It is obviously not possible to show tender and passionate love toward one's enemies, and that is not what Jesus wanted to say. Loving one's enemies means to forgive them and to return good for their evil. That is how we put ourselves above them. By seeking vengeance, we only place ourselves beneath them.
What is to be thought of almsgiving?
Those who are reduced to begging for alms morally and physically degrade themselves in an existence that puts them on the level of the brute. A society based on the law of God and justice should provide for the life of the weak without humiliating them. It should ensure an existence for those who cannot work without leaving them at the mercy of chance and goodwill.
Then do you condemn almsgiving?
No, because it is not the almsgiving per se that is reprehensible, but almost always the way in which it is done. Moral individuals, those who understand charity, according to Jesus, seek out the unfortunate without waiting for them to hold out their hand. True charity is always good and benevolent. It is demonstrated both in the act itself and in the way it is done. A service rendered with graciousness thus has a double value, but if it is rendered with haughtiness, the recipient's need compels him or her to accept it, but his or her heart will hardly be touched. Also, remember that in God's sight, ostentation erases the merit of benevolence. Jesus said, "Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." Therein, he teaches you not to tarnish charity with pride. It is necessary to distinguish between almsgiving per se and benevolence. The one who is most needy is not always the one who begs. The fear of humiliation restrains the truly poor, who almost always suffer without complaining. It is these whom the authentically humane person should know how to seek out without being ostentatious. Love one another, that is the whole law, the divine law through which God governs the worlds. Love is the law of attraction for living and organized beings, and attraction is the law of love for inorganic matter. Never forget that a spirit, whatever its degree of advancement or its situation as an incarnate individual or as a discarnate spirit, is always placed between a more evolved spirit who guides and perfects it, and a less evolved one toward whom it has the same duties to fulfill. Therefore, be charitable not only by taking from your bag a coin that you callously give to the one who dares to beg from you, but by seeking out hidden poverty. Be indulgent toward the errors of your neighbor. Instead of despising the ignorant and the addict, educate and moralize them. Be gentle and benevolent toward all those who are less evolved than you. Be the same toward the lowermost beings of creation, and you will have obeyed the law of God.
Aren't there those who are reduced to begging through their own fault?
Of course. But if a good moral education had taught them the law of God, they would not have fallen into the excesses that led them into ruin. It is upon this, above all, that the improvement of your globe depends.
Maternal and filial love.
Is maternal love a virtue, or is it an instinctive sentiment common to both humans and animals?
It is both. Nature has endowed the mother with love towards her children in the interests of their preservation, but in the animal, this love is limited to the offspring's material needs and ceases when it is no longer needed. In humans, this love persists throughout life and consists in devotedness and self-denial that comprise true virtues. It even survives death itself, accompanying the child from beyond the grave. You can see that this sort of love contains something more than the love displayed in the animal.
If maternal love is so natural, why are there mothers who hate their children frequently from birth?
It is sometimes a trial chosen by the spirit of the child, or it may be an expiation if the spirit itself had been a bad father, a bad mother, or a bad child in another existence. See number 392. In all such cases, a bad mother can only be animated by a little evolved spirit who seeks to create difficulties for the child so that he or she will fail in his or her chosen trial. Such a violation of the laws of nature, however, will not remain unpunished, and the spirit of the child will be rewarded for the obstacles it has overcome.
When parents have children who cause them grief, aren't they excused for not feeling the tenderness for them that they would have felt otherwise?
No, for it is regarded as a task that has been entrusted to them, and their mission is to make every effort to lead them to the good. See Nos 582, 583. Besides, such grief is almost always the consequence of the bad habits that the parents have allowed their children to follow from the cradle. Thus, they reap what they have sown.
Chapter 12. Moral perfection. Virtues and vices.
Which is the most meritorious of all the virtues?
All virtues are meritorious because all are signs of progress on the path of the good. There is always virtue when there is voluntary resistance to the allure of wrongful tendencies. However, the highest virtue consists in the sacrifice of one's own interests for the good of one's neighbor without ulterior motives. The greatest merit is that which is based on the most disinterested charity.
There are persons who do good through a spontaneous impulse without having to struggle with any contrary sentiment. Do they deserve the same merit as those who have to struggle against their own nature, and who manage to overcome it?
Those who do not have to struggle have already made progress. They struggled and triumphed in the past. That is why good sentiments cost them no effort, and their actions seem so easy. Doing good has become a habit for them. They should be honored as old warriors who have earned their rank. Since you are still far from perfection, such examples surprise you by their contrast and you admire them so much because they are rare. However, you must know that on worlds more advanced than yours, what is the exception among you has become the rule. The sentiment of the good is spontaneous everywhere on those worlds because they are inhabited only by good spirits, and a single bad intention would be a monstrous exception. That is why humans are so happy there. The same will occur on the earth when humanity transforms itself, and when it understands and practices charity in its true meaning.
Besides the defects and vices about which no one can be mistaken, what is the most characteristic sign of imperfection?
Self-interest. Moral qualities many times do not stand up when put to the test, like copper gilding that cannot withstand the test of the touchstone. Individuals may possess real qualities that make them appear moral to the world. However, while such qualities do indicate progress, they do not always bear up under certain trials, and sometimes it takes only one touch of self-interest to unmask these individuals' real character. True selflessness is in fact so rare on earth that it is admired as a remarkable phenomenon when it is displayed. Attachment to material things is a notorious indication of a little advanced spirit, because the more humans are attached to the things of this world, the less they understand their true destiny. Through selflessness, however, they show that they see the future from a more evolved point of view.
There are selfless individuals who nonetheless lack discernment, and who waste their possessions without real benefit because they do not know how to use them reasonably. Will they have any merit?
They have merit for their selflessness, but not for the potential good they could do. If selflessness is a virtue, thoughtless squandering is always, at the very least, a lack of judgment. Fortune is not given to some to be cast to the wind any more than it is given to others to be locked up in a safe. It is a deposit for which they will have to render account. They will have to answer for all the good they could have done, but did not do, and for all the tears they could have dried with the money they gave away to those who were not actually needy.
Are those blameworthy who do good without seeking a reward on earth, but in the hope that it may be taken into account in the next life so that their situation there may be better? And does such a thought harm their advancement?
One must do good out of charity, that is, selflessly.
Nevertheless, all have the very natural desire to progress in order to emerge from the painful situation of this life. The spirits teach us to do good with that purpose in mind. So would it be wrong to think that through practicing the good we may hope for a better situation?
Certainly not. However, those who do good without ulterior motives, who do it for the sole pleasure of being pleasing to God and their suffering neighbor, have already found a certain degree of advancement, which will enable them to attain happiness more quickly than those who do good through calculation and not through the natural impulse of their heart.
Shouldn't we make a distinction here between the good that can be done for our neighbor and the care we devote to correcting our own defects? We know that doing good with the thought that it will be counted to us in the next life has little merit. But would it also be a sign of impurity if we were to amend ourselves, conquer our passions and correct our character with the aim of bringing ourselves nearer to the good spirits and of receiving a higher position in the spirit world?
No. By doing good we merely mean being charitable. Those who calculate what each one of their good actions can render them in the other life or in the earthly life proceed selfishly. But there is no selfishness in improving oneself in the hope of drawing nearer to God, because that is the objective for all.
Since the corporeal life is only an ephemeral sojourn on this world, and since our future life should be our principal concern, is it worthwhile to put forth the effort to acquire scientific knowledge that only bears upon material things and necessities?
Absolutely. First, it enables you to help your brothers and sisters. Next, your spirit will evolve more quickly if it has progressed intellectually. In the hiatus between incarnations, you will learn in 1 hour what would require years on Earth. No knowledge is useless. It all contributes in some degree to advancement, because the perfected spirit must know everything. Since progress must be made in every sense, all acquired ideas help the development of the spirit.
Of two wealthy individuals, one was born in opulence and has never known need, whereas the other owes his fortune to his own labor. However, both employ their wealth exclusively.
The one who has known hardship. He knows what it means to suffer, but does not relieve it in others. As usually happens, he no longer remembers his hardship.
Do those who continue to accumulate assets without benefiting anyone have a valid excuse in saying that they are doing so in order to leave the assets to their heirs?
It attests to their bad principles.
Of two misers, the first deprives himself of necessities and dies of want atop his treasure, whereas the second is only stingy toward others but is extravagant toward himself. While he recoils before the smallest sacrifice to render a service or do something useful, nothing seems better to him than satisfying his own tastes and passions. If a favor is asked of him, he is always ill-willed, but if a whim strikes, he is always ready to satisfy it. Which of them is guiltier, and which of them will have the worst place in the spirit world?
The one who spends, he is more selfish than miserly. The other has already received part of his punishment.
Is it wrong for a person to probe the ills of society and expose them?
That depends on the sentiment leading the person to do so. If a writer only wants to create a scandal, he or she does so out of personal pleasure, publishing material that generally sets a bad example rather than a good one. The spirit enjoys it, but it can be punished for the pleasure it feels in revealing wrongs.
In such cases, how can we judge a writer's purity of intention and sincerity?
This is not always useful. If the message is good, benefit from it. If it is bad, it becomes a problem for the writer's own conscience. Moreover, if writers desire to prove their sincerity, it falls to them to support their principles by setting their own example.
Some authors have published works that are beautiful and morally uplifting, which help the progress of humankind, but which they themselves do not take advantage of. As spirits, will the good they have done through their works be taken into account?
Morality without action is like the seed without the sowing. What use is the seed if you do not make it grow in order to feed you? Those persons are guiltier because they possessed the intelligence to comprehend. Having not practiced the maxims they offered to others, they fail to harvest the fruit.
Is it reprehensible for those who do good to be conscious of their deeds and to acknowledge them to themselves?
Since they can be aware of the evil they do, they must be equally aware of the good in order to know if they act rightly or wrongly. It is in weighing all their actions on the scales of God's law, especially on those of the law of justice, love, and charity, that they can tell whether their actions are good or bad, and thus approve or disapprove of them. Hence, they cannot be at fault for recognizing the fact that they have triumphed over their bad tendencies, and for being satisfied for having done so, provided they do not grow vain, for that would be to fall into another wrong.
The passions.
Since the principle of our passions originates in nature, are they evil per se?
No. Passion is the result of excess brought about by the will, though the principle itself was given to humans for their good. The passions can lead them to do great things. Their abuse of them is what makes them evil.
How may we define the limit at which the passions cease to be good or bad?
The passions are like a horse that is useful when controlled, but dangerous when it does the controlling. You can recognize when a passion becomes harmful at the moment in which you cease to govern it, and when it results in any injury to yourself or others.
Could humans always overcome their bad tendencies through their own efforts?
Yes, and sometimes with very little effort. What they lack is willpower. How few of you make such an effort, however.
Can humans find in spirits an effective aid to help them overcome their passions?
If you sincerely pray to God and your guardian angel, good spirits will certainly come to your aid. That is their mission.
Aren't there passions that are so alive and irresistible that the will is powerless to overcome them?
There are many who say I want to, but their will is only on their lips. They want, but they are very happy at not being able to. When they believe they cannot overcome their passions, it is because their spirit is pleased by them as a result of its own impurity. Those who try to restrain their passions understand their own spiritual nature, and overcoming them is a triumph of the spirit over matter.
What is the most effective means of fighting the predominance of the corporeal nature? Practicing self-denial.
Selfishness.
Of all the vices, which may we regard as the root?
We have already told you many times, selfishness. All evil derives from it. Study all the vices and you will see that selfishness is at the bottom of them all. As much as you may struggle against them, you will never uproot them as long as you have not destroyed their cause. Let all your efforts tend toward that end, because selfishness is the true scourge of society. Those in this life who want to approach moral perfection must uproot from their heart every sentiment of selfishness. For selfishness is incompatible with justice, love, and charity. It neutralizes all other qualities.
Since selfishness is based on personal interests, it seems difficult to entirely uproot it from the human heart. Will we ever be able to do so?
As humans become enlightened about spiritual things, they attach less value to material things. Next, it is necessary to reform the human institutions that entertain and excite such attachment. This depends on education.
Far from decreasing, selfishness increases with civilization, which seems to excite and entertain it. How can the cause destroy the effect?
The greater the evil, the more heinous it becomes. It has been necessary for selfishness to produce much evil in order to make you understand the need to uproot it. When human beings have been freed from the selfishness that dominates them, they will live as brothers and sisters. They will not wrong one another, and will mutually help one another through the fraternal sentiment of solidarity. The strong will then be the supporter and not the oppressor of the weak, and no longer will anyone lack what is needed, because all will practice the law of justice. This is the kingdom of the good that the spirits are in charge of preparing.
What is the means for destroying selfishness?
Of all human imperfections, the most difficult to uproot is selfishness, because it is connected to the influence of matter, from which human beings, still so close to their origin, have not been able to free themselves. Everything concurs to sustain its influence, your laws, your social organizations, and your education. Selfishness will be weakened with the predominance of the moral life over the material life, and especially with the understanding that Spiritism gives you concerning your true future state, which is no longer distorted by allegorical fictions. When it is well understood and identified with customs and beliefs, Spiritism will transform habits, usages, and social relations. Selfishness is founded upon the importance of the personality. When well understood, I repeat, Spiritism enables you to see things from such an evolved point of view that the sentiment of the personality somehow disappears, so to speak, before the immensity of it all. Upon destroying this self-importance, or at least showing it for what it is worth, Spiritism necessarily combats selfishness. It is the shock that humans experience from the selfishness of others that usually makes them selfish in turn because they feel the need to put themselves on the defensive. Seeing that others think only of themselves and not of them, they are, in turn, led to be concerned about themselves more than about others. Let the principle of charity and fraternity be the basis of social institutions and the legal relations between nations and individuals, and all will think less of themselves when they see that others are doing so too. Thus, they will undergo the moralizing influence of example and contact. In the light of the present overflowing of selfishness, true virtue is needed to sacrifice one's own personality for the sake of others, who generally do not recognize it. It is to those, above all, who possess this virtue that the kingdom of heaven is opened. For them especially is reserved the bliss of the elect, because I can truly tell you that, on the day of judgment, those who have only thought of themselves will be cast aside and will suffer abandonment.
Selfishness.
Of all the vices, which may we regard as the root?
We have already told you many times. Selfishness. All evil derives from it. Study all the vices and you will see that selfishness is at the bottom of them all. As much as you may struggle against them, you will never uproot them as long as you have not destroyed their cause. Let all your efforts tend toward that end because selfishness is the true scourge of society. Those in this life who want to approach moral perfection must uproot from their heart every sentiment of selfishness. For selfishness is incompatible with justice, love, and charity. It neutralizes all other qualities.
Since selfishness is based on personal interests, it seems difficult to entirely uproot it from the human heart. Will we ever be able to do so?
As humans become enlightened about spiritual things, they attach less value to material things. Next, it is necessary to reform the human institutions that entertain and excite such attachment. This depends on education.
Far from decreasing, selfishness increases with civilization, which seems to excite and entertain it. How can the cause destroy the effect?
The greater the evil, the more heinous it becomes. It has been necessary for selfishness to produce much evil in order to make you understand the need to uproot it. When human beings have been freed from the selfishness that dominates them, they will live as brothers and sisters. They will not wrong one another and will mutually help one another through the fraternal sentiment of solidarity. The strong will then be the supporter and not the oppressor of the weak, and no longer will anyone lack what is needed because all will practice the law of justice. This is the kingdom of the good that the spirits are in charge of preparing.
What is the means for destroying selfishness?
Of all human imperfections, the most difficult to uproot is selfishness, because it is connected to the influence of matter, from which human beings, still so close to their origin, have not been able to free themselves. Everything concurs to sustain its influence: your laws, your social organizations, and your education. Selfishness will be weakened with the predominance of the moral life over the material life, and especially with the understanding that Spiritism gives you concerning your true future state, which is no longer distorted by allegorical fictions. When it is well understood and identified with customs and beliefs, Spiritism will transform habits, usages, and social relations. Selfishness is founded upon the importance of the personality. When well understood, I repeat, Spiritism enables you to see things from such an evolved point of view that the sentiment of the personality somehow disappears, so to speak, before the immensity of it all. Upon destroying this self-importance, or at least showing it for what it is worth, Spiritism necessarily combats selfishness. It is the shock that humans experience from the selfishness of others that usually makes them selfish in turn because they feel the need to put themselves on the defensive. Seeing that others think only of themselves and not of them, they are, in turn, led to be concerned about themselves more than about others. Let the principle of charity and fraternity be the basis of social institutions and the legal relations between nations and individuals, and all will think less of themselves when they see that others are doing so too. Thus, they will undergo the moralizing influence of example and contact. In the light of the present overflowing of selfishness, true virtue is needed to sacrifice one's own personality for the sake of others, who generally do not recognize it. It is to those, above all, who possess this virtue that the kingdom of heaven is opened. For them especially is reserved the bliss of the elect, because I can truly tell you that on the day of judgment, those who have only thought of themselves will be cast aside and will suffer abandonment.
The characteristics of a moral person.
By what signs can we recognize in individuals the real progress that will raise their spirit within the spirit hierarchy?
The spirit proves its progress when all the actions of its corporeal life consist in practicing the law of God, and when it understands the spirit life beforehand.
Self-knowledge.
What is the most effective means for improving ourselves in this life and for resisting the draw of evil?
A sage of antiquity has told you, know thyself.
We comprehend all the wisdom of that maxim, but the difficulty is precisely in knowing ourselves. By what means can we do so?
Do what I used to do when I was living on the earth. At the end of each day, I examined my conscience, reviewed what I had done, and asked myself whether or not I had failed to fulfill some duty, and whether or not anyone might have had reason to complain about me. It was thus that I arrived at knowing myself and at seeing what there was in me that needed to be reformed. Those who every night would recall all their actions during the day and would ask themselves what good or wrong they have done, praying to God and their guardian angel to enlighten them, would acquire great strength for self-improvement, because, believe me, God will assist them. Therefore, ask yourselves about what you have done and toward what aim you acted in a particular circumstance, whether you have done anything that you would blame in others, and whether you have done anything that you would not dare profess. Also ask, if it pleased God to call me at this moment to enter the world of spirits, where nothing is hidden, would I cower before anyone's gaze? Examine what you may have done against God, then against your neighbor, and lastly, against yourselves. The answers will be either repose for your conscience or an indication of a wrong that you must amend. Self-knowledge is therefore the key to individual improvement. But you will ask, how do we judge ourselves? Won't we be under the illusion of vanity, which exalts our wrongs and makes them excusable? Misers think they are simply being thrifty and foresightful, while proud individuals think they are only full of dignity. All of this is quite true, but you have a means of control that cannot deceive you. When you are indecisive as to the quality of any one of your actions, ask how you would judge it if it had been done by someone else. If you would blame it in another, it cannot be any more legitimate for you, for God does not use two measures for justice. Also, seek to know what others think about you and do not neglect the opinion of your enemies, because they have no interest in disguising the truth. Frequently, God places them beside you as a mirror in order to warn you more frankly than a friend would. Therefore, let those who are truly willing to improve themselves examine their own conscience in order to uproot from it their bad tendencies as they uproot weeds from their garden. Let them balance out their moral workday like business persons do with their profits and losses, and I can assure you that there will be more profits than losses. If you can say that your workday has been good, you can sleep in peace and fearlessly wait for your awaking in the other life. So formulate clear and precise questions and do not be afraid to add to them. You would do very well to devote a few minutes to securing eternal bliss. Don't you work every day to accumulate what you will need for rest in old age? Isn't this rest the object of all your desires, the goal that enables you to endure temporary fatigue and deprivation? Well then, what is the rest of a few days, troubled by the infirmities of the body compared to what awaits the moral person? Isn't it worth a little effort? I know that many will say that the present is certain, but the future is uncertain. That is precisely the thought that we have been charged with tearing down in your minds, for we desire to enable you to understand that future in such a way that no doubt can remain in your soul. This is why we first called your attention to us through the phenomena of nature, by touching your senses, and why later we gave you instructions that each one of you has the duty to spread. It was with this purpose in mind that we have dictated the Spirit's book.